This will sound very strange, but the death of John Lennon of the Beatles, who was shot in Manhattan, and the release of the new Beatles song, which used artificial intelligence technology in its creation, and this song was released on the same day that Kamala Harris spoke in the UK about artificial intelligence technology, and the Beatles are from the UK. And in the song, Paul McCartney plays tribute to George Harrison by playing a slide guitar, is all part of a prophecy from the righteous Christian God of the Bible that is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on December 27th, 2024, and that there will be a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke explosion in Manhattan on December 28th, 2024. After Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash, it is predicted that Joe Biden will appoint Michelle Obama as his vice president, and then Biden is predicted to step down, and Michelle Obama is predicted to become the 47th president. And as I will explain in this profound video, God is using this Beatles new song, Now and Then, in order to point back to the Beatles' #1 hit in 1966 with their song titled Michelle. Through this Beatles prophecy and Beatles song Michelle, God is revealing that Michelle Obama will become the president so that Barack Obama can become the president again. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, this Beatles video, this Beatles prophecy video is so profound, and it is for sure one of my favorite videos on this channel. Make sure you watch all of this video. It also gets more and more profound as it goes, so you need to watch all of the video. That's the point. It gets more profound as it continues. From the Grammy win for Song of the Year for the song Michelle, the Beatles won the Song of the Year for their song Michelle at the Grammy Awards on March 2nd, 1967, exactly 519 months before the date that Paul McCartney sang Michelle at the White House at a formal occasion on June 2nd, 2010. The Grammy Awards, of course, is a formal ceremony, and so was this White House event. And they both occurred on the same date of the month, the 2nd of the month. It was March 2nd in 67 and June 2nd in 2010. And this is exactly 519 months apart. And when Paul McCartney sang Michelle at the White House to Michelle, that's the point here, by the way, of course. This is a prophetic sign. Paul McCartney is singing, and it was Paul McCartney's song as well. This was especially Paul McCartney's song. He had developed this song on his own before he joined the Beatles, the early stages of the song, when he was busking on the street and during his time in Paris. This inspired him. This was, okay, so this is a Paul McCartney song especially, and anyway, when he sang the song at the White House, he said he said it in a way to not offend anyone, or offend Barack Obama, the husband of Michelle Obama. He said, I forget what he said, but he said something like, "You'll forgive me here, but I've been wanting to sing this song here, Michelle, at the White House," because of course Michelle Obama. So it's a little bit of irony, and Paul McCartney even mentioned it. So Paul McCartney is singing Michelle, a love song for Michelle, and that's why he mentioned something to Barack, and didn't really look too focused on Michelle while he was singing the song, for good reason. But he sang it right in front of Michelle, and of course Michelle got excited, and so did Barack, and so did their two daughters that were sitting next to them in the front row. All right, so Paul McCartney sings the song Michelle to Michelle, and this is a prophetic sign about Michelle Obama. This is the reason why the song Michelle exists. It was a prophetic sign from God way back in 1967 that would point to Michelle Obama, who would be the door through which the Antichrist would become the president again. So it's exactly 519 months between these two dates. In turn, June 2nd, 2010, when Paul McCartney sang Michelle to Michelle, it is exactly 5,119 days to the date it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president at the White House. I should say, the date that Paul McCartney sang Michelle to Michelle at the White House is exactly 5,119 days before the date it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president at the White House. There is a rhyme here, as you probably have noticed. 519 months rhymes with 5,119 days. Okay? I'll repeat that since I messed it up. 519 months rhymes with 5,119 days. It's a 519 and a 5119. The reason for this is that it hints at the date 519, May 19th, the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which will lead to the appointment of Michelle Obama as her replacement, and then she will become the president after Joe Biden is predicted to step down on June 7th, 5,119 days after Paul McCartney sang Michelle to Michelle at the White House. All right. What you just heard was recorded prior to May 19th, 2024. I need to interject here. It is now after that date. In fact, it is December of 2024 now. And I need to explain how this works. God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. It's an interconnected web of prophetic signs, and none of God's prophetic signs can be fully or properly understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs, something that is missed by others that are interested in prophetic signs, and is a big reason why the vast majority of God's prophetic signs are missed completely. Unaware of, for example, what I'm talking about in this video right here. Now, May 19th, like I just spoke about, was a date that was known ahead of time, and it was known to be a date God was pointing to for Kamala Harris and her predicted plane crash. There is a lot to say about this, and I want to keep this brief, and I've explained it in other videos. But May 19th was a date God was pointing to because it was the birthday of Malcolm X, and Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash in St. Louis, which is a location that will point to the X that was engendered over America with the paths of totality of the two eclipses in 2017 and 2024. Okay, and on that note, an X is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist described in the book of Ezekiel would have been a Tav mark, and the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet, or the Tav letters were also a symbol for things, and the Tav was a symbol for a mark, and it was an X in Paleo Hebrew. X's are two straight lines that intersect each other, and so X's are about their midpoints. And the midpoint date of the two eclipses that engendered an X over America was December 14th, 2020. And that was the day that the first American took the thing outside of a trial, which identified it, the thing, as the mark of the Antichrist. So again, we were looking at this May 19th, 2024 date ahead of time. And on that day, we received the prophetic sign that confirmed all of the analysis. Well, two prophetic signs that confirmed all of the analysis, and therefore it was 100% correct, all of the analysis, because this is how it works. It's not possible to necessarily know the date that God is pointing to, whether it will be the end of the trail, in this case, the event of Kamala Harris dying in a plane crash, or a step leading on to more prophetic signs that are eventually leading to the date Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Okay, so we got the sign we expected in advance, which was an aviation disaster. This was the day that the leader of the nation, the Islamic nation of Iran, died in a helicopter crash. It was an aviation disaster. And again, the date was known ahead of time because of it being the birth date of Malcolm X. And Malcolm X was a leader of the Nation of Islam. And on this day, the leader of the Islamic nation of Iran died in a helicopter crash. Furthermore, prior to May 19th, it was known that God is using helicopters for symbolism with their rotor blades because they are in the shape of an X. And it is again the birthday of Malcolm X. And again, we are expecting Kamala Harris to die in a location that will point to the X over America. Okay, but not only that, on that same day, May 19th, 2024, the leader of the nation of America, Joe Biden, delivered a speech, a commencement speech to the historic all-black male college, Morehouse College. The leader of the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, was known for delivering speeches to all young black male audiences. Okay. So in other words, May 19th was 100% correct. Now, I just also mentioned how the date that Paul McCartney sang Michelle to Michelle at the White House connected with 5,119 days to June 7th, 2024. That was also another step. It was a date that God was pointing to for being when Joe Biden will step down and Michelle Obama will become the president. God was overwhelmingly pointing to this date also for this particular theme of Joe Biden stepping down. And that was the day that the host of Wheel of Fortune stepped down. It was the last episode. There's more regarding what happened on June 7th and the connections and everything that, pointed to that date ahead of time and everything, which I won't explain here because it's also explained in other videos. But June 7th was a major date that God was pointing to ahead of time, long story short, and we received the sign we expected in advance, which was the stepping down of Pat Sajak. I could give you more confirmation to why that's relevant, etc., but I think that's enough for this video. Now, therefore, the 5,119 days connection is valid because of what I've just explained, right? And so is the 5,119 months. Again, it was exactly 519 months from the day that the Beatles won the Grammy Award for Song of the Year for Michelle before Paul McCartney sang Michelle at the White House. Okay, so that's amazing. And again, a big part of all of this, the reasoning for the 519 is because of the date 519. It was very important, this date 519, okay? And again, the date 519 connects on in the big picture of signs to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which is December 24th, 2024. Now, there's something that needs to be explained a little bit more here. I forget if I explain it later in the video. I don't think so. But I touched upon it a minute ago. which is that Paul McCartney was inspired to the song Michelle. Paul McCartney was inspired, got his inspiration. Sorry, I just woke up. Paul McCartney got his inspiration for the song Michelle while he was in Paris, specifically busking next to the river Seine, the Seine River in Paris, the famous river. This river is where the Notre Dame Cathedral is. The Notre Dame Cathedral is on an island in the Seine River. By the way, the Seine River hints at sin, as in Sin River. And there's another prophetic sign on the Seine River that happened recently, which was July 26th, 2024, the day of the first ever opening ceremony Olympics parade being outside of a stadium, which, again, if you don't recall, took place in a boat parade on the Seine River. Well, anyway, the reason for all of this and this connection to Michelle is profound and astounding beyond words, because when the Notre Dame Cathedral was on fire for 9 hours, because the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs, and from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and this was a massive judgment, a warning of judgment for the church. Roof fire, because the church in the roof symbolizes the church, because the church age began when the tongues of fire came down on the disciples in the upper room. But this massive church fire on the Seine River occurred exactly when Michelle Obama was on the Seine River on a boat cruise. And there is an iconic image of this that went viral. She's sipping a glass of wine on the roof of the boat, and in the reflection in the glass, you can see the burning cathedral. And so she's, in a way, drinking the burning cathedral. And the name of the cathedral refers to a dame, madame, a woman of high regard, a woman of authority, if you will. Not that has anything to do with truth regarding who Mary is, because, of course, Catholicism isn't Christianity. Not to say, you know what I mean. Like, it's man-made religion. It's pagan. The worship of Mary is pagan religion on top of the Bible. It has nothing to do with the Bible. But the point is, though, is that this is symbolism that's pointing to Michelle. Now, Michelle was on the boat, on the river, to promote her autobiography, Becoming, as in God communicating that she will become the Notre Dame, if you will, the Our Lady, the Queen of America. That's relevant because the day she was on the river was exactly 3,666 days after she committed a faux pas when she hugged the Queen. Okay? And a faux pas is a word that's derived or borrowed from the French language. So she was in France, where they speak French, 3,666 days, which hints at the Antichrist, 666, but also a third term for the Antichrist, Barack Obama. And so she committed the faux pas, and then exactly 6 weeks after she was at the Notre Dame Cathedral while it was on fire, was the plane crash of a plane owned by a company named Encore after it flew over the capital, Washington, D.C., and caused the F-16s, which ends at 4x4 and the 44th president, to be launched and create a sonic boom over the Capitol because it flew over restricted airspace because the pilot had become incapacitated, and the plane departed from the 4x4th state, 16th state, F-16s, right? And he in this prophetic sign, he had a heart attack because of having taken the thing, like many pilots have had, and that's why he crashed. And anyway, the plane was owned by a company named Encore, which is another word that's borrowed from the French language. Well, this hints at the encore of Barack Obama as the president again, after Michelle Obama will become the president. Okay, and it was 6 times 6 times 6 weeks exactly after Michelle Obama was in France, the Encore plane crash. Not only that, though, but on the day of the Encore plane crash, Michael J. Fox crashed onto a couch at a Back to the Future panel at a convention, and Michael J. Fox identifies Barack Obama as the Antichrist too, because God is using these MJs, Michael J. Fox, Michael Jordan, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, Michael Jackson. All of MJ is equal to 23 in simple English gematria, and Barack Obama was the basketball president who wore jersey 23 in high school. That's just scratching the surface of it. But also Fox, F-O-X, Fox, F is the 6th letter of the alphabet, O is the 15th, and 1 plus 5 is 6, and X is the 24th letter of the alphabet, and 2 plus 4 equals 6. And also, Back to the Future, the movie, predicted 9/11. It was a prophecy from God. The plot of the movie is about a prophecy where Marty is trying to warn Doc about the future and terrorists at the Twin Pine Malls, etc., which into the Twin Towers and the terrorism and all that, right? So God used this movie as a prophecy for a warning for about 9/11. That's a long story, which is explained in another video. Okay, so the point is that Paul McCartney got his inspiration for the song Michelle while he was in Paris at the Seine River. And this is pointing to Michelle at the Seine River, which, again, as I've just touched upon, is a prophetic sign that identifies her becoming the Queen of America. All right? So, G 5119, which means the 5119th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, is the word that means then, at that time. Then this and this, that, then such and such happened, in other words. That's the word we are talking about, the word then, which, in other words, means at that time. The Beatles' New Song, they released a new song in November of 2023 that reached number 1. It was their first number 1 hit in 60 years. I'll explain later. I forget the details. There's so much to this Beatles story. That's why this video is so long, and it is all amazing. And I can't remember it all. Furthermore, I haven't revisited this video in a few months. So anyway, it's prophetic. The fact that they had their number 1 song a certain amount of time that hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist, since their first number 1 song, all right? It'll be explained later in the video. I apologize, I don't recall offhand. But anyway, they released a new song, and this song that went to number 1 on the UK chart is named Now and Then. And that's why God is using this song to point to this word then to confirm this 5,119 days connection, which hints at the word in the Strong's Concordance that means then. Now and then. And the then is a reference to a specific date. May 19th, 519. The date. Then. Now and then. Then Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on May 19th, 519. That's why the word 5,119 in the Greek concordance is the word then, and why the new song is named Now and Then. It's so amazing. There is much more profound significance to the name Now and Then, which will be explained later in this video. McCartney played in the song, he plays a slide guitar in tribute to George Harrison. Kamala Harris was in the UK for the Global Summit on Artificial Intelligence, AI, on the same day that the band from the UK, and they are known for being the band from the UK because they symbolize the British invasion in the 1960s, the rock invasion from Britain. Okay, so Kamala Harris was in the UK for a global summit on AI on the same day that the band from the UK released their new song that is known for having used AI in its production. The song wouldn't have been possible without AI. And not to get technical, it's regarding the voice of John Lennon and what he left behind on the demo tape. And the song couldn't have been recorded earlier. They wanted to, but only since the advent of this technology, which they call AI, was it possible. And the song was released on the same day and the song was released in the UK, obviously. The band is from the UK, and it reached #1 on the UK chart. But the same day that the song was released, that involves AI in its production, was the same day that Kamala Harris was in the UK for the Global Summit on AI. It is profound confirmation that this is a prophecy that is pointing to the date that it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash so that Michelle Obama can replace her. McCartney sang to Michelle at the White House exactly 13 years and 5 months before the release of Now and Then, which was again, or didn't mention the date, I don't think. It was released on November 2nd, 2023, again, the 2nd of the month. So McCartney sang on the 2nd of June in 2010, exactly 13 years and 5 months before the 2nd of November in 2023. So all three of these dates, as we have now seen, include the number 2, or rather the 2nd of the month, because God is making these prophetic connections, which are obviously much more easily done with a precise number of months. And so there must be, therefore, some significance to 13 years and 5 months, which is the equivalent of 161 months, but I could not find any meaning to 161. But I did find meaning for 13 years and 5 months, because G135, which is what God would be hinting at with 13 years and 5 months, is the word for riddle. And this is precisely what is going on here. This 519 months and then 5,119 days, that hints at the date 519, that is the definition of a riddle. Okay? But what is also profound, now again, it has to be something to do with the exact months, but if it weren't the case that the two dates were on the exact same day of the month, this would be enough right here, because this is equivalent to exactly 490 weeks, which is a reference to the most central prophecy in the Bible in Daniel chapter 9, which regards the 70 weeks prophecy, which is a 7 times 70 prophecy. In the prophecy, it is 490 years, but the word used that's translated into English is translated into as weeks, from the Hebrew Shabua, which simply means a unit of 7. In the prophecy, it's a 70 times 7 period of time, and it's in fact 70 times 7 years, but it's translated into most English translations as weeks, and it's known as the 70 weeks prophecy. Okay, but again, it's a total of 490 weeks, but this 490 weeks is the equivalent of, no, I apologize. It's exactly 700 weeks, all right? But it's 4,900 days. So, okay, just to be clear here, I wasn't very clear when I first recorded this. This is a typo. It's 4,900 days. It's exactly 700 weeks. Okay? And what I mean is that 4,900 days is also a hint at the 490 years in the most central prophecy in the Bible. Furthermore, it's about a period of time, and so is the song. The song is all about the passage of time. Even the lyrics of the song, John Lennon wrote this to Paul McCartney as a love song, friendship, and the song is about the passage of time, etc. But also, of course, the title of the song is a reference to time, and that's what, of course, the prophecy is about. This central prophecy in the Bible is about the passage of time, and the number in that prophecy is 490. And so 4,900 days is a hint at that. Also, I think I forgot to mention that what we are talking about here is Michelle Obama becoming the president through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. Kamala Harris is the 49th vice president. Michelle Obama is predicted to replace the 49th vice president and then become the president. In either case, it is pointing to this prophecy, which regards the period of the end times and the Antichrist. All right? So it's extremely relevant because it's a period of time, 4,900 days, and the prophecy is about a period of time, 490 years, which is what 4,900 days hints at. 70 weeks, well, this is 700 weeks. It's exactly 700 weeks. Let that sink in. That's hinting at the 70 weeks prophecy, okay? I think I've repeated myself here now. So, again, from the day that McCartney sang Michelle to Michelle at the White House, it is exactly 700 weeks to the release of the song Now and Then. And it couldn't be more profound because of the Daniel chapter 9 prophecy. All right. And that's because it hints at the Antichrist. That prophecy, the 70th week of the 70 weeks, is about the Antichrist. And Michelle Obama is the door through which the Antichrist will return to the White House. Because Michelle Obama is predicted to appoint Barack Obama after she becomes the president as her vice president, and then she is predicted to step down. All right. Now and Then, the song was released on the same day that Harris was in the UK, 199 days before Harris's predicted crash on May 19th. So you would figure, okay, so God has pointed to the date that Michelle Obama will become the president with the 5,119 days and the 519 months back to the song Michelle. But you would figure that because Harris was in the UK on the day that Now and Then was released, that the date that Now and Then was released would point to the date of her predicted crash. So what is the interval of time between November 2nd, 2023 and May 19th? It is 199 days. Okay? 199 hints at 19 and the number 9. And that is because the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 19 symbolizes God's perfect judgment, because the number 10 symbolizes God's perfect order. 10 plus 9 equals 19, perfect judgment. Also, 19 is a prime number. It is only divisible by 1 and 19, which hints at 9/11, 2 ones and a 9. It is the 4 plus 4th, in other words, 8th prime number, and that hints at the 44th president. John Lennon was shot and killed, died next to Central Park in Manhattan, 9 months and 11 days, which hints at 9/11 in Manhattan, the 9/11 events in 2001 in Manhattan. He was shot next to Central Park in Manhattan, 9 months and 11 days before the date 9/19. which is what we were just talking about, how 199 hints at 19 and 9. Okay, so, and John Lennon, the member of the Beatles, was shot 9 months and 11 days in Manhattan next to Central Park before the date 9/19, when Simon and Garfunkel had their prophetic union concert in Central Park in Manhattan. So now God has overlapped Paul Simon specifically, but Simon and Garfunkel and the Beatles and John Lennon specifically. But more specifically, Paul Simon and the Beatles. So God has overlapped these two baby boomer generation singers, and that is why. Because it is a generation sign. Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse, when asked about when he would return, he spoke of this concept of a generation. And he said that the generation that would be alive at the time of the rebirth of Israel, which was 1948, would not pass away before the end times and the return. And that is why God is using these leaders of the baby boomer generation, the leading edge of the demographic even, the first baby boomers, John Lennon and Paul Simon, as symbolism for this generation, right? And that's why they overlap. There's more regarding this in the Paul Simon Generations Baby Boomer video, all right? Now, Paul Simon also sang at the White House 4 times 40 days, which hints at 44 and the 44th president, which is the equivalent of 23% of a year, and God pairs 23 and 44 to confirm his signs and connections, as the 44th president was also the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. All right, Paul Simon sang at the White House on April 10th this year, 4 times 40 days exactly, after the song Now and Then was released. Simon sang at the White House, and by the way, again, the date that the song Now and Then was released connects to the day that Paul McCartney sang at the White House. And by the way, both of these singers' first names are Paul. Paul Simon, Paul McCartney. The two singers named Paul sang at the White House, and the dates that they sang at the White House connect prophetically. Okay? Again, Paul McCartney sang 13 years and 5 months, which hints at riddle, and that is exactly 700 weeks, which is astounding, to the date that the song Now and Then was released, and then Now and Then was released 4 times 40 days before Paul Simon sang at the White House. And Simon sang at the White House for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris 13 times 3 days, which hints at 133, which is the 44th prime number, which hints at the 44th president, before Harris's predicted crash. So there you have it. That is how the date of the release of Now and Then connects to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. What also confirms this too, is as a second witness, is that Paul Simon, the number 13 God is using in the Paul Simon signs, because he has a song named America, and the number 13 symbolizes America. America was founded with 13 colonies, and America is the 13th tribe of Israel. The tribes are symbolized by the colonies, or rather the colonies are symbolism for the tribes. Manasseh was the 13th tribe. Joseph was replaced by Ephraim and Manasseh. And Manasseh was the younger one that was allotted the inheritance. That's because Ephraim symbolizes the UK, which would be Paul McCartney, who sang first, the firstborn. But then Simon sang at the White House, the younger, and that's because God demonstrated in the Old Testament that Manasseh would be the one to receive the inheritance, although he was the younger one. That's because America, the younger sibling of the UK, is the primary nation of God, God's Gentile nation. Secondarily are the Anglosphere nations led by the UK. Anyway, you get the idea what I'm getting at. The number 13 symbolizes America. And so and God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And that's why from the date that Paul Simon sang at the White House, it is 13 plus 13 plus 13 days to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. And again, she is predicted to die in St. Louis, the center of America, in order to point to the eclipses that centered over America. And so that's more reason why this is appropriate, this America symbolism and connection between the White House and the date she was predicted to crash, May 19th. But as I explained a minute ago, May 19th was a step in the trail of signs, but valid. So the analysis is valid. That's how it works, right? I knew May 19th ahead of time because of these things, which therefore confirms the analysis. This is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. When the prediction comes to pass, ultimately it will prove all of this. All right? And so, yeah. And it is appropriate that the end times not occur after the baby boomer generation has passed away. I have known for many, many years that there is absolutely no way. I've known intuitively. There is not even based on the prophecy, because the prophecy alone we can know that, like I just explained, the generation would not pass away. But we can know this intuitively as well, in my opinion, that there's absolutely no way that the baby boomer generation would exit the stage before the end times judgment and destruction of the nation, because they are responsible for the destruction of the nation. Not that they are, when I say that, I don't mean like they didn't have predecessors. Of course, this was many generations in the making, but their cultural revolution and the radicals from the 60s that after the 60s infiltrated the institutions, and specifically education, and warped the minds of the millennial generation, especially. I'm thankful that I'm not a millennial. Had I been born a little later, I would have gone through the abomination that the school system has become, the indoctrination of Marxist. Anyway, I'm getting off subject here. This is it's not even possible to explain it in a soundbite here, what the baby boomer generation symbolizes in terms of the destruction of the nation. But there's no way that the baby boomer generation gets away without, it just has to be the way. The baby boomer generation is the generation that it all revolves around, right? And they know it too. They've known it their whole lives. They are the center of it all. So that's why Paul Simon and John Lennon and the Beatles, they symbolize the baby boomer generation. All right, it's time to talk a little bit more about the date of this prophetic sign we are focused on, which is the release of the song Then and Now, the newest last song also, the last song of the Beatles, which is, by the way, also symbolic of that theme I was just talking about, which is the end of the baby boomer generation. They are about to exit the stage. The song is really about that in a way, but also the video is. For example, in the video, which is a must watch, The Beatles exit the stage. They vanish. It's a goodbye. It's a farewell. But it's a symbolic farewell not only of the Beatles, but of the baby boomer generation. Okay, so this date is important that this song was released on. God used this for a very good reason. This date of November 2nd. Let's just explain something first before I get into, there's a few things here. One thing at a time. The date 11-2 hints at 11 times 2 equals 22, which is the number in God's signs that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, so for example, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist, described in the book of Ezekiel, would have been a Tav mark. Again, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are also symbols for things, and the Tav was a symbol for a mark. And the Tav is the last and 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, which is the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes. And a chromosome is made of 2 arms. And chromosomes come in pairs. So 2 and 2, in other words, 22, which is another way God has identified the mark of the Antichrist, or uses this number 22 to symbolize it. Since we were talking about 9/11, and we are going to talk about 9/11 in a second, the Twin Towers symbolized the 2 arms of a chromosome. How did God prove this? A couple of ways. One, exactly 70 weeks, and we just talked a minute ago about the most central prophecy in the Bible, the 70 weeks prophecy. Exactly 70 weeks after they officially opened, on the date 4/4, which hints at the 44th president in 1973, exactly 70 weeks later, Philip Petit evaded security and walked a tightrope across the Twin Towers. Speaking of Philip Petit and his connection to Michel, which is connected to the Notre Dame Cathedral fire, prior to Philip Petit walking across the Twin Towers, he walked across the 2 towers of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is what inspired him to walk across the Twin Towers. So it all connects to Michel, actually. Well, Philip Petit walked across the Twin Towers with a tightrope, with a balancing pole, with a man at the center, which engendered symbolically a cross with the man at the center. When the towers collapsed, there was the perfectly proportioned 20-foot steel beam cross that was standing upright in the debris field that was discovered. Today, this cross is in the 9/11 museum, and this cross is actually a part of how I came to faith personally, which was the purpose of the cross. But anyway, at the beginning of the Twin Towers and at the end of the Twin Towers, we have a cross. Now, the reason for the name Philip Petit is because the 2 arms of a chromosome, the smaller of the 2 is in scientific terminology named petite, which is French. Speaking of Michel, because the song Michel is a French song, right? Oh, and that's the thing I forgot to mention earlier. Yes, the song, if you're familiar with the song, has French lyrics in it. I did mention how it was inspired when Paul McCartney was at the Seine River, but the song, Michel, my belle, and what's the other verse? Mot très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. These are words that go together well. Okay, so he sings the verse in French. So anyway, that's, all about Michelle, and she was on the French River. That's such an important part I forgot to mention. Okay, so anyway, we have the guy from France, Philip Petit, and he was from France, by the way. He emigrated to the U.S. after he was caught, after he walked across the Twin Towers and became famous. But, okay, so The small arm of a chromosome is named petite. The twin towers were symbolism for the two arms of a chromosome. And the twin towers were replaced with the one world tower. And if you look at the one world tower, it is most certainly resembling a thing that is used to put the thing inside people. Look at it again if you don't know. It is a thing, this one world tower. Now, the one world tower and the twin towers that looked like a giant 11 hint at Genesis chapter 11, which is about the Tower of Babel, that the world, as in the World Trade Center, came together to build in an attempt to become like God and reach heaven without God. It was symbolism for what is happening today. The attempt of the progressive left to build a nice society without God, and this false religion of the progressive leftism, leads ultimately to this mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolism of this technology, like the technology of the Tower of Babel is symbolism for. Okay, this TRANS humanism technology, which is the mark of the Antichrist, which is all symbolized by the Tower of Babel, including also the World Trade Center and the One World Tower. All right, so that's why Kamala Harris was in the UK for a summit on AI on the same day that the AI, the song that was possible because of AI technology, was released. The Beatles song, and the Beatles are from the UK. Now, something else here. The Beatles are also the leading edge of what was called the British invasion. The British invasion. This is symbolism for the coming invasion of demons. The demonic realm is about to collide with the earthly realm, which is what the British invasion is symbolized by, which is why Kamala Harris's death and her time in the UK, the AI summit, is relevant here, and why the song was released on the date 11/2, which hints at 11 times 2 equals 22 and hints at the mark of the Antichrist, which is ultimately going to involve AI technology, or is involving AI technology. Because the mark of the Antichrist, the thing that was put inside of people, has inside it components that are self-assembling, hence the AI, that will form transistors that will be receivers for the 5G frequencies that will engender delta brainwaves, which will facilitate demonic possession. There is coming a mass demonic possession of those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. And that's all facilitated through, if you will, AI technology. And that's what the demons colliding with the earthly realm will be, and that's why the British invasion symbolism here, which is why Harris was in the UK on the day of the British invasion band's release of their new song, Now and Then, which hints at the end times period involving the mark of the Antichrist and this judgment coming on the baby boomer generation, etc. Okay. So that's one aspect of this prophetic date of 11/2. Another aspect is that it hints at 9/11. And the themes overlap here, as I've been explaining here, because 9/11 also pointed to the mark of the Antichrist, as I just explained. So how does 11/2 hint at 9/11? Well, it hints at the two planes that struck the two towers that looked like a giant 11. And also, again, before I forget, John Lennon pointed to 9/11 because, again, he was shot next to Central Park in Manhattan where the 9/11 events took place, exactly 9 months and 11 days before Paul McCartney and Art Garfunkel had their prophetic reunion concert in Central Park in Manhattan. Okay. And music, by the way, is frequencies. And the mark of the Antichrist will facilitate mass demonic possession through frequencies. That's why in Ephesians 2:2 in the Bible, which is at 22 also, there's a phrase that the Apostle Paul used that is a metaphor for Satan, which is the prince of the power of the air, which will also be the symbolism, incidentally, of Kamala Harris's plane crash when she falls from the air. On her way to Los Angeles, which is Spanish for angels, it will hint at fallen angels. Again, her location of the crash will point to the X that was engendered over the US, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist because of the middle date, but also the X is symbolism for chromosomes, because a chromosome is an X, that are altered by the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, now the date 11/2 as, for example, a precedent to confirm this. By the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic sign. Well, on the date 11/2 in 2020, we had the death of the actress who was the clock lady in the movie Back to the Future. Back to the Future, I already explained how it connects to Michelle Obama and how it was a prophecy from God regarding 9/11. Well, the clock lady is symbolism for this too, because she in the movie is promoting a restoration of the clock tower. And the clock tower is the central part of the plot of the movie, where Doc and Marty harness the power of the lightning strike that they know is going to happen in order to power the DeLorean to time travel back to 1985. Well, lightning, because, well, this is symbolism for the Antichrist, because the name Barak in Hebrew means lightning, but it struck the tower, just as the planes struck the tower. Well, that's why the clock lady died on the date 11/2, because of the symbolism I just mentioned about two planes striking the tower that looked like a giant 11. But that date, 11/2 in 2020, was exactly 999 weeks after 9/11. And God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. Furthermore, God, for his second witnesses, pairs certain numbers together. And if we think about it, a simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together. And he pairs a 9 and 23 together. Well, anyway, 11/2 was at the time that it was announced by the authorities. Take it for what you will, because of course it's not a true number, but nonetheless it's used in prophecy. 230,000 deaths, which is at 23. That pairs with the 999 weeks exactly. Also, the clock lady, her last acting role in a TV series was Mrs. Harrison, which hints at Kamala Harris dying in a plane crash. On 9/11, 110 stories collapsed when the Twin Towers collapsed, and 110 days after the death of the clock lady was another step in the trail of signs, which was February 20th, 2021, which hints at 220, and it was 2 times 110 stories, which hints at 220, that collapsed on 9/11. On February 20th, 2021, the plane dropped its engine. The plane's engine exploded. A flight 328 over Boulder County in Colorado, and on and on. Okay, so I'm not going to get off too much track, but there. Okay, so that's just a precedent. 11/2 in 2020. Okay, so 11/2 in 2023 was the day of this prophetic Harris sign, which again was the day of the release of the Beatles song in the UK that used AI technology, and Harris was in the UK for the AI summit because of the British invasion symbolism, symbolizing the coming to mass demonic possession of people facilitated through the AI technology that was inserted into them with the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, this is why. Oh, and also there's more, actually. The date 11/2 hints at the two planes that struck the two towers on 9/11, which were 110 stories, which also hints at 11. And on 9/11, it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, made up of 11 letters. And that's because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God, which is what the warning on 9/11 was. Okay? And the reason for all of this is because Flight 11 departed from Governor's Island, Logan Airport in Boston. Governor's Island is the island on which the first governor of Massachusetts lived, John Winthrop, who led the 11 ship flotilla of pilgrims across the Atlantic. The pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic and their escape of persecution from the King of England as analogous to the Israelites' escape from the persecution of the king of Egypt before they crossed the Jordan River into their promised land. The pilgrims saw the New World as their promised land. Before the pilgrims departed their ships into the New World, John Winthrop delivered his famous City on a Hill speech, which was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. Which was the speech that Moses gave from God to the Israelites before they crossed into the promised land. Deuteronomy chapter 28 is extremely profound. You should read it again. It is the chapter that God explains his promises of blessings and curses depending on their decision to either obey or not his commandments. Which is why John Winthrop gave this speech before they departed the ship. The ships, the 11 ships. Now, the number 11 symbolizes this. It is symbolic of reflection. This duality, this choice, this reflection between promises of blessings and curses. God promised that Israel and the Jews would be destroyed if they were to, in the future, disobey his commandments. In fact, he speaks as if they will, because he knows they will in the future. And Israel was destroyed. This is the message that God is giving America here. America is about to be destroyed because, as John Winthrop promised at the spiritual founding of America, when America would turn from God, it would be destroyed. And again, this is most symbolized with the baby boomer generation. But the reflection here is why 1 and 1. It's a line symbolized by another line. It's a reflection. That's how God would do it with the number 11. It's interesting, though, that the X is really two lines also like the number 11 that intersect each other, which engender the middle date of the eclipses, as I just explained, the date that points to the mark of the Antichrist and the coming judgment, which is leading to the British invasion, the demonic invasion. Now, so that's why, but the date 11/2 also hints at this. It hints at the two choices, the two planes that struck the two towers that were looked like a giant 11 is symbolic of the two choices that were given to the pilgrims and America, therefore, at the founding of the nation. That's the significance of the date 11/2. This is how important this is. How important is it? It's so important. That's how important this sign is. The release of this Beatles song, the band that symbolizes the baby boomer generation. But not only does it symbolize the baby boomer generation, because the baby boomer generation symbolizes everything. The cultural revolution that took America radically away from God, and the leftism, the religion of leftism that has replaced Christianity and is destroying America. It is judgment. The leftism and the left are judgment from God. The politics that the progressive left bring to America that is destroying America is their own judgment. They are destroying themselves. As Dennis Prager says regarding end times prophecy, it's really not necessary for God to do anything. The left will, in fact, destroy America all by itself, which is exactly what's happening. But of course, they are inspired by Satan, the spirit of Satan. They don't know it. Their decisions and actions and their minds even are influenced by the pervasive spirit of Antichrist that can be in people that are not following God, right? So, okay, so that's how huge this is. Okay, so it's all pointing to Kamala Harris's death because she was in the UK during all of this for the AI summit. This incorporates so much, this Beatles song, but it also points to Michelle Obama, as I'm explaining, who will lead to the rise of the Antichrist, the return of Barack Obama to the White House as the president, because she will appoint him the vice president and then she will step down. But this will all come about through the death of Kamala Harris and the death of President Trump, which is predicted to be 2 days after the death of Kamala Harris. Now, I think I've explained everything here for now, for this part. Okay, now we come to the connection. So the date 11/2, now that I've established the significance of the numbers, the date 11/2 connects to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on December 24th, 2024, with 1 year, 10 months, and 22 days, which hints at a 2 and 11. That's the symbolism in this. Okay, and what's also interesting too is that if we include the starting date in the calculation, the date 11/2 in itself, we get 1 year, 10 months, and 23 days. And that's also extremely prophetic, especially in regards to Kamala Harris's plane crash. Okay, because it gives us the number 1123, right? 1 year, 10 months, and 23 days gives us 1123. 1123 is the 188th prime number. God uses this number frequently in his signs to point to H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means woe exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. When Kamala Harris dies in a plane crash, it will be a massive woe, especially when it leads to the return of Barack Obama to the White House and the rise of Michelle Obama as her replacement. That's a woe. Not only that, though, it's predicted that Kamala Harris will die next to the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, because in the Bible, judgment symbolically on a people begins at the gate. Kamala Harris was born exactly 1 year, 8 months, and 8 days after construction began on the Gateway Arch. That's a 188. There's something also here. Again, I explained how the date 11/2, the release of the song, points to 9/11. and then connects with this number that hints at 188. Well, 9/11 was the only other time in history that a foreign power, a foreign enemy, attacked the nation's capital, after the other time that was exactly 188 years prior. On 9/11 in 1813, 188 years before 9/11 in 2001, the British invaded. The British invasion. The British landed, that's the invasion part, they landed at George Washington's Mount Vernon estate. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington. Okay, let me just go off onto a side note here. George Washington was inaugurated in Lower Manhattan and in Federal Hall, and after he marched down Wall Street into Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. And he knew more than anyone, because he saw the hand of God in the Revolutionary War, and had there not been the hand of God as he knew, they definitely would have not won that war. And anyway, that's exactly what happened on 9/11 temporarily. God's divine protection and blessings were temporarily removed. The Trinity Chapel today is known as the Miracle Chapel because it was the only building at Ground Zero that survived the falling debris, and did so without even a broken window, due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted in the process in sheltering the chapel. Today, there's a 20-foot-high bronze statue of the roots of the tree to commemorate this. This is because in Isaiah chapter 9:11, the warning from God to the ancient Jews regarding the Assyrian raid, the world's first documented terrorists, in which they uprooted the sycamore trees in Isaiah chapter 9:11. Okay, so the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate before they proceeded to burn down the Capitol building and the White House, but not before First Lady Dolly Madison famously rescued the portrait of George Washington. And then 188 years later, after the British invaded and landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate, was the day that the plane crashed into the Pentagon. And by the way, that was Flight 77, which hints at Kamala Harris. Because 7 times 7 is 49, she's the 49th vice president, and the flight path from Washington to Los Angeles will be the same flight path on which she will crash. Okay. So you have now, I just established here, this connection between the release of the song Now and Then, in which Paul McCartney tributes to George Harrison, and the day that Kamala Harris was in the UK for an AI summit. Okay, it connects. It connects with the 11 and 2 symbolism, and also the 188 whoa exclamation mark symbolism to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Now, it's also predicted that, speaking of Manhattan and 9/11 and John Lennon being shot 9 months and 11 days before the prophetic reunion concert in Central Park in Manhattan, this song Now and Then also is a John Lennon song, right? That's how the song came to be, is because John Lennon made a demo tape of this chorus that Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr used to create the new Beatles song. So it's a John Lennon song. Anyway, so John Lennon is about Manhattan here, symbolically. Oh, by the way, John Lennon's song, Tomorrow Forever, what's the song? You know the song. It was the first ever psychedelic song. That song has the chorus. Let me just get it. The song of John, this is arguably one of the most biggest songs of the Beatles in Beatles history, because it changed everything. This is the song that symbolizes the Cultural Revolution. This was the first psychedelic song, literally. And I mean, the Beatles radically changed everything. What you need to do actually is watch the must-watch documentary titled "How the Beatles Changed the World," because literally the Beatles were the leading edge of the baby boomer generation. They literally did change the world in every possible way. So anyway, this song is emblematic of it all. Tomorrow Never Knows. The song begins with, "Turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. It is not dying. It is not dying. Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the void. It is shining. It is shining." Okay. That is so symbolic here because God is using this symbolism of the shining, including the movie The Shining, written by Stephen King in 1977. Part of this, never mind. 7 Kings prophecy in the Bible. Anyway, that points to that identifies Barack Obama as the 8th king in that prophecy, as a secondary fulfillment of that prophecy. Anyway, the movie The Shining and the death of Shelley Duvall, who dated Paul Simon, who sang Graceland at the White House, which begins with the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar, because the movie The Shining is about demonic possession. So this is important that I add this here because we've talked a lot about the significance of Kamala Harris and the AI technology, her attending the AI summit on the day of the release of this Beatles song that was a John Lennon song. And come to think of it, this explanation wouldn't be complete at all without bringing in this song Tomorrow Never Knows, which is what it's all about. Because what's coming is this promise promoted by the demons pretending to be aliens of immortality. The first lie ever told in the book of Genesis, when the serpent lied to Eve and said that she shall surely not die. Eat the tree, eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. This is the last lie of the age as well, because of the coming promise of technology giving people immortality, which is symbolized by this thing. And through taking it, it will engender demonic possession, which is what the shining is. So I'll just read the lyrics again here of this song that is emblematic of the Beatles and the cultural revolution of the baby boomers. Turn off your mind and the replacement religion, the New Age religion, the consciousness revolution that replaced Christianity, the invasion of Indian religion that's replaced Christianity in the West. If you ask most people today whether they believe in God, the vast majority will not say they're no. Only about 13% are like true atheists. The majority of Westerners today will say, yes, but not like the God of the Bible, an impersonal energy, a collective consciousness, the invasion of the Indian religion that was inspired by the Beatles in the 60s, and specifically symbolized by this particular song, the Antichrist religion, New Age religion, which is confusion, because if you talk to these people, they don't really know what they're talking about. But God is an energy, right? Well, anyway, that's turn off your mind, relax down, and float downstream. It is not dying. John Lennon is saying, he's speaking to this promise of immortality. It is not dying. It's symbolic of this, right? And then he goes on to say, surrender to the void, which is actually, in truth, surrender to Satan. It is shining. It is shining. Okay? So, anyway, back to what I was saying about John Lennon. He was in Central Park, or next to it, when he was shot. Oh, and that's also symbolic of all of this, because he was shot. God is using shootings and SHOTs as symbolism for the things that come out of guns and go into people are symbolic of things that come out of things and go into people. So that's why Lennon was SHOT'd, next to Central Park in Manhattan, where the towers fell that symbolized the mark of the Antichrist, which is an SHOT. Okay, so now the thing is also, I'm predicting that there will be a dirty bomb, or a plural, and that date is predicted to be December 28th. And that is 2 times 211 days after the date 11/2, when this John Lennon song was released. So John Lennon has all of this 9/11 symbolism, as I've just explained, including where he was shot, etc., 9 months and 11 days before the other music frequencies side of Paul Simon, okay? And so the day of this release of this song, Now and Then, also connects to the coming dirty bomb explosions, but that'll also engender mass evacuation from Manhattan Island. And that is in turn symbolism for the coming evacuation of God's people in the rapture. Christianity's most preposterous idea, when God's faithful will not go through the severe persecution from the Antichrist and instead disappear instantly and be with the Lord, and then return with him in their resurrected bodies for the 1,000 years of peace on earth later in 2026. Okay, so that's also how John Lennon connects into this, because of the coming dirty bombs, and that connecting with 2 times 211, which gives us this 11 and 2 symbolism again, which I explained the prophetic symbolic significance of earlier. One other interesting confirmation, too, is that this song, Tomorrow Never Knows, was known for being, like I said, the first psychedelic song ever. But that was also because of the use of new innovative technology in the studio that the Beatles invented while recording this song. There's actually a story to the actual recording in which they had tapes strewn about the entire studio. Anyway, I don't know all the details, but what I do know is that this song is known for its innovative use of technology, and that parallels with this release of this song Now and Then, which was a John Lennon song. Both of these songs are John Lennon songs, and this song is known for the use of AI technology in order to isolate John Lennon's voice so that the song could be made. Because he, in the demo tape, sang while also on the piano, and they needed to isolate the two in order to make the song, and that wasn't possible until the new recent technology. In other words, they did make a couple of other songs that John made in demo tapes prior to this in the 1990s, but this song couldn't have been produced back then. Okay, so that's an amazing parallel, because that's more confirmation of what I am saying, which is that this is pointing to this song, Tomorrow Never Knows. This AI technology, new Beatles song, Now and Then, is actually pointing to Tomorrow Never... Oh, you know what? Both of the titles are a reference to time. Now and Then and Tomorrow Never Knows. That's another parallel, in case there was any doubt, that this song Now and Then is actually pointing to Tomorrow Never Knows. And the reason for that is, as I explained, the first couple of verses or lyrics in the song regarding not dying and shining. In other words, demonic possession and his promise of immortality. But also another thing too is that in the book of Revelation chapter 9, it says that those who will become demonically possessed will seek death and not be able to find it. So that's another allusion here with this, it is not dying, and the shining. Okay, it's also talking about how those who will become demonically possessed won't be able to die. But more than that too, it's talking about the coming promise of immortality through the mark of the Antichrist, which again is the S-H-O-T, which is why John Lennon was S-H-O-T'd. All right, it turns out that December 24th, 2024 was also a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. The signs were so amazing and so relevant, and relevant also to the theme and subject of what I was just talking about prior to me speaking right now. What I was just saying was recorded prior to December 24th. And as you heard, we expected this theme of the mass demonic possession that is coming for those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, triggered by frequencies, which is music, etc. You listened to all of that. I talked about Revelation chapter 9 and the fifth trumpet. The Revelation chapter 9 is the fifth trumpet. And it's believed that 5G frequencies will trigger the mass demonic possession that is described in the fifth trumpet. And, well, on December 24th, we had a number of prophetic signs that confirmed all of the analysis in a huge way, including the Antichrist, Pope Francis, the first of the two Antichrists, opening 5 portal doors. He conducted a ritual in Rome, which is Mystery Babylon, the Vatican. He conducted a ritual in which he opened 5 doors. At least it was the beginning of the ritual of opening 5 doors, which is a hint at the fifth trumpet and the 5G frequencies. And that's the portal symbolism we are looking for. On this day, December 24th, Kamala Harris turned exactly 3,140 weeks old, and she's predicted to die in the area code 314, right next to the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, which is symbolic of a portal and a door. The Vatican is symbolized by keys. The symbol for the Vatican is keys, and Revelation chapter 9 begins with the description of a key, or the angel with the key opening the bottomless pit, unlocking the bottomless pit from which the fallen angels will emerge and cross over into the earthly realm and begin the demonic possession, the wicked things that will be happening that are described. Kamala Harris will be departing from Los Angeles. She will fall from the first heaven, the sky, and that will be symbolism for fallen angels. She'll crash next to the Gateway Arch, which will be symbolism for the door and portal. Okay, so that's why we received this Pope Francis portal sign, and it was 5 of them. It was also, when he opened the door, he first knocked 3 times. 5 doors knocking 3 times is why this December 24th, 2024 sign was exactly 5 times 3 years after Barack Obama received his Nobel Peace Prize on the same day in Sweden, on the same day of the giant mysterious spiral light in the sky over Scandinavia that was symbolic of a portal. The exact 5 times 3 years is actually in the Hebrew calendar from the date 923 to 923 in 2024, 923 in 2009. That's because Barack Obama is the basketball president who wore jersey number 9 and was inaugurated wore jersey number 23 and was inaugurated in 2009. Michael Jordan wore 23 and wore number 9 for the USA Dream Team when they outscored their opponents by an average of 44 points, as in the 44th president. Well, anyway. And by the way, Michael Jordan is another 23, because I just recalled that we were just talking about Michael J. Fox, another 23. But so anyway, the Pope opened these doors on this Christmas Eve day, and the stock market on that day The Dow gained 390 points, which is Ezekiel chapter 4, 390 days regarding judgment on Israel. And also G 390 in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word return, and it's the word that James used when he quoted the prophet Amos chapter 9, verse 11, which hints at Revelation 9:11 and this coming to mass demonic possession and the opening of the bottomless pit, etc. The door opened by the key of the Vatican. And also the NASDAQ on that day gained 266 points. Pope Francis is the 266th Pope. Yes. So that's the signs we were looking for. There were other signs too. There were 31,000 American Airlines flights that were stopped or grounded and then resumed just before 8 a.m. That's because the American Airlines flight departed Boston at 7:59 a.m. just before 8 a.m. on 9/11, as in Revelation 9:11. 31,000 is 31 is the 11th prime number. It was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that flew into the Twin Towers. It looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state. New York City is made up of 11 letters because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in the last chance for America to repent and turn back to God. And so that's why 31,000 flights, but also the 31,000 grounded flights on this December 24th date, the state we were expecting a plane sign for Kamala Harris, or at least her death. 31,000 flights also hints at 314, the area code 314, because 314 hints at pi, 3.14. Okay, and so the Pope knocked at the door 3 times. This is relevant because, again, Kamala Harris is predicted to die at the Gateway Arch, which is symbolism for a door, a portal. Pope Francis knocked at the door portals. He knocked at the door portal 3 times, which revealed adding 3 days to get to December 27th, 2024. The date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis next to the Gateway Arch, the door portal. In the Bible, judgment symbolically begins on a people at the gate. The Gateway Arch is the gateway to the west, and it is symbolism of the beginning of judgment and the collapse of walls of security, as in the barrier between the demonic realm and the earthly realm that has been opened with the key by the Antichrist at the Vatican. All right. On November 2nd, the Beatles released a new song. It was a song that apparently John Lennon had been working on before he died. And with the help of, I guess, new technology, including AI, they were able to make a new song with all 4 of them involved. All 4 of the Beatles, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison, contribute to this new song that was released on November 2nd. And as I will explain, this was a prophetic sign from God that is revealing the date that there will be a bomb, a suitcase nuke, or a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on February 3rd, 2024. And also, the release of this song is revealing that Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash also on February 3rd, 2024. And I will explain how this song reveals that in a second. But before I begin, I just want to add that it isn't surprising that God would use the Beatles in a prophetic sign at this late stage. The Beatles represent a lot. And one thing that they represent is the baby boomer generation. And God is not, the end times are happening now because the baby boomer generation is about to exit the stage. The baby boomer generation is not going to exit the stage without the end times happening before then. The baby boomers are starting to reach the age where they are beginning to disappear, to die, but that's only just begun. And the vast majority, of course, of baby boomers are still alive, but they are in their last phase of life. But them and their cultural revolution in the 1960s and 70s radically changed American society and culture. It's not their fault. They're part of a movement that preceded them, etc. However, what I'm saying is that this narcissistic generation, the ideological generation that is currently at a civil war with itself, broken into two camps. And that, by the way, is a cyclical thing that happens every 80 to 100 years. This, what historians call the prophet or gray champion generation, when they become of age, engender a cultural revolution, and then by the time they are elders and in power, they engender an institutional revolution. And every 80 to 100 years, they break off into two camps and have a civil war. In fact, the Civil War was a baby boomer type generation that was at war with itself. And the same with the Revolutionary War 80 years before that, and on and back into history. But what I'm saying, though, is that it makes intuitive sense to me that the end times are not going to happen after the baby boomer generation has left the scene. They are a part of this, and they will be judged. And what I am saying also, and how this ties into the Beatles, is they are this baby boomer generation's cultural revolution in the 1960s that brought us things like abortion and what also historians call the consciousness revolution. It was the birth of a new religion in America and the West, which is what, like I'm saying, is called the consciousness revolution. It is the spiritual but not religious, quote unquote, movement. Those that call themselves spiritual but not religious, that is a religion in itself. And another name that people have called it in the past, and currently still do to a degree, is the New Age religion, the New Age movement, or the New Spirituality is another term or another name for it. But it is the consciousness revolution, because every 80 to 100 years in that cultural revolution that is cyclical, there is a religious awakening of a sorts. This time, though, in the 20th century, it was the consciousness revolution, and it replaced the God of the Bible. And it is rebellion against God. And the Beatles embody that. The Beatles symbolized that, because the Beatles were on the leading edge of the baby boomer generation. They are baby boomers, but they're at the older end of the baby boomer generation, and they were the leaders of their generation. They were at one time, at one point they had the number one album on the pop chart and the number one album on the alternative rock chart as well. I mean, they how can I describe how influential the Beatles were? But they also led this trend to go to India. The Beatles went to India, and they, for a period, followed a guru. George Harrison is also quite known for having followed Hare Krishna, for example. But the Beatles were a part, anyway, in the 1960s of this movement that saw baby boomers and Westerners going to India, for example, and experimenting with all kinds of things, LSD and meditation and Eastern religion and philosophy. In other words, the consciousness revolution. So anyway, this consciousness revolution religion is Antichrist. And that's why I'm saying, in a way, it isn't surprising that God would use the Beatles in a prophetic sign here, right at the end. And I mean really right at the end, because we are very, very close to the return of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024. The new Beatles song is #1 on the charts in the UK. Okay, so I wrote this on November 11th, so I don't know if it still is. Today is November 22nd. But anyway, the new Beatles song reached #1 on the UK charts, and it did so, and this was a part of the news story, 60 years and 6 months after their first #1 song, which is a record time span between the two, between a band's first #1 hit and their last #1 hit. God uses records in his signs, and this is a literal record, pun intended, because of course they produced literal vinyl records. So they called their albums records back then. So in 66, as in 1966, the Beatles had a #1 hit titled Michelle. 60 years and 6 months hints at 66. In other words, this first #1 song since their, this #1 song that is 60 years and 6 months after their first #1 song hints at 66 and their #1 song in 1966. Okay, to confirm, and I'll demonstrate this, but of course we are talking about this prophetic significance of Michelle, alluding to Michelle Obama, who will become the president and then appoint Barack Obama as her vice president, which will lead to him becoming the president and the Antichrist. And the Antichrist, for that matter, is described in the 66th book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, and his number is 666. Okay, to confirm his signs, God pairs 9 and 23 together, and I've explained that many other times in other videos. But this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would provide a second witness, if we think about it, is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 23, because the Antichrist, the basketball president, wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school and became the president in 2009, and also will return to the White House in 2023. Okay, so Michelle, the song, won Song of the Year at the 9th Grammys. Okay, now the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment in his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment from the Bible. And so at the 9th Grammy Awards on March 2nd, 1967, the song of the Beatles titled Michelle won Song of the Year. All right, now just hold on to that because I made an error in the last paragraph, so I'm just going to skip ahead. But just keep that in mind, the 9th Grammys, Michelle, the song, won Grammy of the Year. All right? Michelle Obama was born 188% of a year before the song Michelle was released. That is astounding beyond words. All right, that completely confirms the connection between Michelle Obama and the name or the song Michelle. Okay, because 188 is extremely profound in God's prophetic signs because it hints at the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, which is the word woe, ! Used in context of extreme judgment from God. If you've watched any number of videos on this channel, you will have come across this 188 number repeatedly for good reason. And so we have the birth of Michelle Obama, 188% of a year before the song Michelle was released. That is astounding, and it is rock solid confirmation that we are talking about that this song Michelle is pointing to Michelle Obama. Okay? All right, so this song, the new song Now and Then, although all of the Beatles contribute to this, this really is a John Lennon song. I mean, he wrote the song, first of all, and importantly, as will be explained more later in this video, It really is a love song for Paul McCartney. I'll explain more later in the video. I'm tempted to get into it here, but let's just leave it because I've already explained it quite well later in this video. So this is a John Lennon song, in a way. And John Lennon, in simple English gematria, is 121. And if you don't know what gematria is, Hebrew, Roman, and Greek letters are also numbers, and as such, names and words can be converted into a numeric value, which is called gematria. Okay, in 121, the equivalent of John Lennon's name, when A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc., 121 is 11 times 11. It is 11 to the power of 2. And that is what's hinted at with the date that the song was released. This John Lennon song was released on November 2nd, which hints at 11 to the power of 2. This 11 to the power of 2, and also 11 times 11, is 9/11 symbolism. The big warning of judgment from God for America to repent, or else destruction and judgment, was the 9/11 events. And on 9/11, it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, which is made up of 11 letters. And this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction. And 11 to the power of 2, or the date 11/2 itself, hints at the two planes that struck the two towers that looked like a giant 11. Each of the towers consisted of 110 floors, which also hints at the number 11. And so, this is why John Lennon's name, and John Lennon died in Manhattan, where the 9/11 events took place. His name is 11 to the power of 2 in gematria. His song was released on 11/2, and as I just explained, this hints at the two planes that struck the two towers that looked like a giant 11, that were 110 stories high, which hints at 11. So, this is all 9/11 symbolism. Now, to confirm God's signs, patterns, and connections, he pairs certain numbers together. This is how his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, and this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 110, or for that matter, 9 and 11. And the reason why I know this is because I've been studying God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night, more than full-time hours, for 6 years. Okay, and so, I mean, that's not so much of a stretch anyway. I think most people can see that immediately, that God would pair 9 and 11. But he also pairs 9 and 110 for this same reason. And I'm tempted to play a short clip explaining this, but it's been explained many other times in other videos, so I think I'll just leave it. and you'll take my word for it this time. Well, actually, it's pretty important, and I think that will really drive home the significance of the connection. So I'm just going to take a pause and briefly play a short clip, just a couple of minutes, a few minutes, that explains why and how God pairs 9 and 110 together. And I'll be right back. And if you've seen the clip before and you know that God pairs 9 and 110 together, sorry to be redundant, you can skip ahead 7 minutes. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110 and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the two towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of two towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God, Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath-Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. All right, now I'm going to tie it all together. Again, I was explaining how John Lennon's name is 11 to the power of 2, and the date of this new song, which was written by John Lennon, was released on the date 11/2, and how all of this is 9/11 symbolism, and the release date of the song on 11/2 was exactly 680 months after the song Michelle won Song of the Year. Now, I'll explain the significance of 680 months in a minute, but the reason for it is that the 68th word in the concordance, the Bible concordance, the Hebrew concordance, is the word stone. And that connects us with the new Rolling Stones album that was released just 13 days prior to the release of the new Beatles song. Quite the coincidence that the media picked up on, and isn't a coincidence, it is designed by God, as I will explain. But anyway, we have, in other words, a connection from the release of the, or rather from the win of the song Michelle at the 9th Grammy Awards, the 9th annual Grammy Awards. We have this connection, which is confirmed because of the significance of the Rolling Stones, which I will explain in a minute. Okay, and it was the 9th Grammys. which is why from the release of the new song on 11/2, which is 9/11 symbolism, it is 110 days to the date it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the president. By that time, which will be February 20th, she will have already been appointed vice president after the predicted death of Kamala Harris on February 3rd, 2024, which this release of the song is also hinting at. Because on the day of the release of the song, which used AI in its production, Kamala Harris was in the UK, which is where the Beatles are from, for a conference on AI. Furthermore, speaking of the Beatles being from the UK, they are synonymous with what is called the British invasion, but that is symbolism for the destruction and invasion of the enemy into America. That's another reason for this connection to the UK and the Beatles and Kamala Harris in the UK at the time of the release of the song. She will be replaced by Michelle Obama. That is what is hinted at with the song. Furthermore, in the song, Paul McCartney plays tribute to George Harrison, with his use of the slide guitar. Okay, so we have all of this being communicated here. It's very straightforward, actually. Oh, and the Rolling Stones' new album was released on Kamala Harris's birthday, just days before the release of the new Beatles song, when she was in the UK for AI, and the song is using AI, and the Beatles are from the UK. Okay, so you can see where I'm going here. In other words, from the win of the song Michelle in 1966, this Michelle song connects with a solid confirmation, a solid connection to the release of the new Beatles song, which connects in turn with 110 days to the day that Michelle will become the president. So from the 9th Grammys and the win of Michelle, we have a 110 days connection in a very straightforward pattern or trail of signs. Right? 9th win for Michelle, 680 months, which hints at the Rolling Stones, to the release of the new song, and then 110 days. And that 110 days gets us to February 20th, which hints at 220. On 9/11, there were 2 towers that were 110 stories high that collapsed in God's judgment, and 2 times 110 is 220. In other words, that's more 9/11 symbolism. So the 9th Grammys and the 110 days gets us to the date February 20th, which hints at 2 times 110, 9/11 symbolism. And the writer of the song, the composer of the song, John Lennon, his name itself also hints at 9/11 because his name is 11 to the power of 2. Or even 11 times 11, Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that struck the North Tower, etc. So I think I've established this here. I think you get it. And again, Michelle was born 188% of a year before the before the release of the song Michelle. 188, by the way, is also a 9/11 number. 9/11 was exactly 188 years before the only other time a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital. Of course, on 9/11, there was a plane that struck the Pentagon in the nation's capital. 188 years exactly before that, on 9/11 in 1813, was the day that the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate. And then proceeded to burn down the White House and the Capitol building before being chased out of Washington, D.C. on the same day by a hurricane designed by God. So, and anyway, so that's 108. That's one reason why 188 is a 9/11 number. But also, the second plane had a crew of 9 people, and it struck the second tower 17 minutes after the first one. And 17 divided by 9 is 1.888 into infinity. In other words, it hints at 188. Okay, so, and God pairs 9 and 17 in his signs to confirm the signs and connections. That is very important in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, the pairing of 9 and 17 in general. So there you have it. So that, I think, is enough to get us going. That's enough for now on this connection with Michelle. There's lots more to this video, however, with all kinds of amazing information. Another connection is, speaking of Kamala Harris and her predicted plane crash, which is predicted to be on February 3rd, 17 days before Michelle Obama will become the president. February 3rd, the date 2-3, hints at the number 23. And God pairs 9 and 23 together, big time, to confirm his signs, patterns, and connections. I won't play the clip explaining that. That's been explained many other times in other videos. But essentially, the basketball president who wore jersey 23 in high school became the president in 2009. Well, from the release of the song, the new Beatles song, which used AI, on the same day that Kamala Harris was in the UK for an AI summit, from that date, it is 93 days, which hints at 3 9s, to the date 2-3, which hints at 23. So, the reason why the number 9 and 3 9s in 93 is because God frequently repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. And this is why, for example, the sun is 93 million miles away from Earth. It is the sun that will erupt with a solar flare, predicted to be on February 22nd, that will knock out the nation's power grid. It will be the follow-up judgment, if you will, to the 9/11 events that was the warning for the collapse of America's divine protection and security. So, anyway, the point is that 93 hints at 3 9s, which connects between the Harris's day in the UK for AI, on the day that the release of the song that used AI from the Beatles, who are from the UK, to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on 2-3, which hints at 23, which makes it a pairing of 9 and 23, which confirms the signs and connections. It is also predicted that on the same date, February 3rd, 2024, a dirty bomb, or dirty bombs plural, 2 of them, or a suitcase nuke will explode in Manhattan, New York City, which is why John Lennon died in Manhattan, and there will be a mass evacuation. And this is also predicted to be on February 3rd, the date 2-3, which connects with 93 days to the John Lennon song. And there's lots more to this too, which I'll explain later in this video. However, this is a new revelation. the date that the bombs are expected to explode in Manhattan. So keep this in mind as you watch later. But as I will explain, this is all connected to the Rolling Stones and their last album, A Bigger Bang, which is a hint at the bang in Manhattan, which is why they had the release party for their new song in Manhattan, but also the bigger bang, which will be the bang from the sun that will knock out the nation's power grid. But now you know, because when I originally recorded this, it was in November, and the date 2/3 for these predictions wasn't known at that time. And so now more light has come into place and more understanding has come to be. And so you'll see now how this all fits. Just remember that the date 11/2 connects with the 93 days to the date 2/3. And again, that's why John Lennon is known for being someone in Manhattan and why he died in Manhattan, etc. So, all right, the song was written by John Lennon. And if you know the history of this new Beatles song, it's quite something. I'll explain it more later in this video, actually. But anyway, John Lennon wrote it, from what I understand, in 1978, shortly before he died. Anyway, there's huge prophetic significance in this, in that, and the demo, he's actually singing in the song, because he made a demo, and with the artificial intelligence technology, they were able to isolate his voice from the piano, and they were able to use his voice in the song, and this is what made the song possible, the new AI technology. Okay, now, God uses gematria. If you don't know what that is, Roman, Greek, and Hebrew letters are also numbers, and as such, names and words can be converted into a numeric value. And in gematria, the name John Lennon is equal to 726. All right? And that is astounding because, as I mentioned earlier, this song, this new Beatles song, was released 60 years and 6 months. It became number one. It reached number one, a record 60 years and 6 months after their first ever number one song. And of course, the Beatles are known for their number one songs. I mean, that's the Beatles. So this is very symbolically significant in itself as well, because we are talking about the Beatles, the number one song band. They are the band that produced nonstop consecutive number one songs. Okay, so it's 60 years and 6 months after their first ever number one song, this new song that reached number one, and 60 years and 6 months is 726 months, and John Lennon's name equals 726. The reason why that is also astounding beyond words is because this is a number that God uses in his signs, because of the 726th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word that means rapture. And if you don't know what that is, in Christianity, it is its most preposterous idea. However, it says in Bible prophecy that God's faithful will be rescued, taken to heaven, instantly disappear, to avoid the severe persecution from the Antichrist, and then will return with Lord Jesus Christ at his second coming, and rule with him in the 1,000 years of peace, in the Messianic age. Okay, so that's the significance of 726. Which is the equivalent of 60 years and 6 months, 726 months. And this gets us to the John Lennon song, and it is all about John Lennon and how he recorded this demo that made this song possible. And John Lennon's name in gematria equals 726. It is through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash that the Antichrist will rise to power through her replacement. And this is why on the day of the release of the song, the Beatles' New Song, Kamala Harris was in the UK on a trip, and the Beatles are from the UK, and they are all about being from the UK, as it is about the British invasion, right? That's what they termed it. The Beatles led this British invasion of UK pop groups that topped the charts in the US. So the Beatles are quite synonymous with being from the UK. In the song, Paul McCartney paid tribute to George Harrison with a slide guitar, which is deeper than just what it sounds, because George Harrison played the slide guitar, but he didn't play the slide guitar with the Beatles. But also, this is significant because it is known that there was some criticism during their time together from McCartney to Harrison about, or rather, I think from what I understand, there was some unappreciated instruction, excessive instruction from McCartney to Harrison regarding his guitar playing at a certain time. I'm not the expert on the Beatles, and from what I understand, the Beatles got along quite well, and they were good friends and goofed around and joked around all the time, including right up until the end. But they are known for this. McCartney is known for, anyway, so that's the point there. So it's the connection to Harrison, and which is ultimately connecting to Harris. Anyway, this song that pays tribute to Harrison was released on the same day that Kamala Harris, was in the UK for a global summit on artificial intelligence technology, a summit for AI. And the song was made possible due to AI technology. It is astounding. All right? So clearly, and furthermore, the death of Kamala Harris will lead to her replacement with Michelle Obama. And the song Michelle reached number 1 in 1966, which is what 60 years and 6 months hints at. So the coming predicted explosions in Manhattan and subsequent evacuation from Manhattan Island is in turn symbolism for the coming evacuation of God's faithful in what is called the rapture. For those that don't know, the rapture is this idea in Christianity in which God's faithful will disappear and not die and escape the severe persecution from the Antichrist, and then return with Lord Jesus Christ at his second coming. And that is why John Lennon's name equals 726, which is the number that symbolizes the rapture. And the reason for this connection between John Lennon and the evacuation from Manhattan Island. Furthermore, the song Michelle has lyrics in French. The song was inspired by the Bohemian Parisian left bank culture. Michelle Obama was on the Seine River in Paris during the Notre Dame Cathedral fire on April 15th, 2019. On a personal note, I handed out warning flyers on the left bank, flyers warning of what's coming, the end times, etc., and a lot of important information. And I handed these out on the left bank of the Parisian River, the Seine River, and also inside the Notre Dame Cathedral, incognito. Okay, it took 9 hours to put out the fire. The song Michelle won Song of the Year at the 9th Grammys. Paul McCartney, was inspired by his faux French songs he would sing as a teenager while busking in Liverpool, UK. Michelle was on the Parisian River for a dinner cruise promoting her book Becoming. 3,666 days after her faux pas when she hugged the Queen in the UK. Okay, so did you get that? She did a faux pas. That's like the word in English. It's borrowed from French. It's a faux pas, right? And this was in the headlines when she did this, when she and Barack visited the Queen. She did a faux pas. This was in the UK. Now, the biggest UK band, the Beatles, Paul McCartney, was inspired with his faux French. He was faking French when he would sing as a teenager busking in Liverpool. Okay, so we have this connection here. And like I'm saying at the beginning here, the song was inspired by his time in Paris and the Bohemian left bank culture. Okay, and that's the river right where Michelle Obama was. All right? Okay. She was on the Paris River exactly 6 times 6 weeks before the 4 deaths in the plane over Washington, D.C. that caused the scramble of 4 F-16 fighter jets and 16 hints at 4 times 4 and the 44th president in Washington, D.C. And the plane was owned by a company named Encore. Encore is French for again. And the 44th president will become the president again. And I should emphasize become because Michelle Obama was promoting her book Becoming at the time of the fire, and she was on that river boat cruise on the river, which, if I failed to mention, was actually affected her cruise. Her cruise was redirected because of the fire. Okay. After Michelle will become the president, okay, so she will become the president again as Encore as a result of a plane crash, which is why the plane owned by the company Encore crashed after it flew over Washington, D.C., and there was 4 deaths and 4 F-16 fighter jets were scrambled because of it. Okay. On the day of the plane crash, which was 4 deaths and 4 F-16 fighter jets, MJ Fox, Michael J. Fox, okay, MJ, the initials equal 23 in simple English gematria, which is why it's prophetic, because Obama wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school. And Fox hints at 666, because F is the 6th letter, O is the 15th letter in the alphabet, and that hints at 1 plus 5 equals 6. And X is the 24th letter, which hints at 2 plus 4 equals 6. And that's why God uses Fox in his signs here. And that also includes Jamie Foxx, by the way, in his signs. But anyway, Michael J. Fox, on the same day as the plane crash, fell onto a couch on the stage of a Back to the Future panel, which hints at Back to the Future reality when Obama will become the president again. That's the hint there with all of that. But again, this Fox sign, and again, Fox hints at 666, this was exactly 6 times 6 weeks after Michelle Obama was on the Paris River. And we're talking about a connection to the plane owned by a company named Encore, which is French. And in turn, her time on the river and the Notre Dame Cathedral fire was 3,666 days after her faux pas with the Queen. All right? Did you get all that? That's amazing. More regarding all of this, by the way, is explained in the must-watch Back to the Future Prophecy video on this channel. Absolutely make sure you watch that video. There's a reason for the 3,000 days, which makes it 3,666 days, just for one example, and that isn't, of course, even scratching the surface of the scratching of the surface of the information in the Back to the Future video. All right, I had a feeling the Rolling Stones are connected to this. It can't be a coincidence that they just released a new album just 13 days before the release of the new Beatles song. Naturally, the media is talking about this coincidence. The new Rolling Stones album was released on Harris's birthday, Kamala Harris. Michelle will become the president as a result of the death of Harris. The 56 years and 8 months connection is also 680 months, which hints at H68, a stone. Okay, so the 68th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word meaning a stone. This completes the connection. The new Beatles song is billed as the last Beatles song, and the talk about the Rolling Stones' new album is how it could be their last. This is symbolism for the end of the road for American culture, the end times. These bands also symbolize the British invasion, which is symbolism for walls of security collapsing, Book of Joshua, like I explained. So the 680 months connection needs the Rolling Stones, and together the Beatles and Rolling Stones' new releases confirm the 680 months connection. All right, so in other words, long story short here, we have an astounding confirmation of the connection between the song Michelle and this new Beatles song, okay? And again, it's all pointing to Michelle Obama, and through her, the rise of the Antichrist. So again, from the Song of the Year Awards, the 9th Grammys, it is exactly 680 months to the release of the last Beatles song, and it coincides with the timing of the release of the new album by the Rolling Stones, and 68 is the word that means a stone. Yes, the Rolling Stones release is key and is part of this connection from the Beatles' Michelle song. October 20th, 2023 is 2 times 23, which hints at, again, at 223, the 48th prime number, which hints at the 48th president. Days, okay? So 2 times 23, in other words, 46 days, to the predicted appointment of Michelle as the vice president on December 5th. 2 times 23 is 46 days, and she will be appointed by the 46th president, Joe Biden. 2 times 23 days is also 12.60% of a year, which hints at 1,260 days in Bible prophecy, which regards the period of the time of the Antichrist. October 20th, 2023 was Harris's 59th birthday. 59 is the 17th prime number. October 20th, 2023 is 17% of a year before it is predicted that Michelle will become the president. To confirm his signs, God pairs 9 and 17. 17% from the 17th prime number birthday of Kamala Harris is also exactly 9 weeks. And God also pairs 9 and 23. This 9 weeks is also 2 months and 3 days, which hints at 23. And again, Harris was in the UK for a summit on AI on the day that the new Beatles, who are from the UK, song that used AI in its production was released, making it more relevant that the other British UK invasion band released its album on her birthday. The launch party for the new Rolling Stones album was the main part of the story. The launch party was in America 59 years after the British band first invaded America. Okay, so what a coincidence. On Kamala Harris's 59th birthday, the media was talking about how the Rolling Stones were having a launch party 59 years after they first came to America. Okay? And a big part of this story was the performance of Mick Jagger and the Stones with Lady Gaga for Sweet Sounds of Heaven, the name of the song. Lady Gaga. Lady is a sort of title, which hints at the title of vice president and president. Gaga, in Simple English gematria, is 16, and it's also 16 in Hebrew gematria. And by the way, if you don't know what gematria is, Roman, Greek, and Hebrew letters are also numbers. And as such, names and words can be converted into a numeric value. All right, and 16 God uses to hint at 4 times 4 and the 44th president. That's the point here. The launch party was in Manhattan. That's a typo. It's 44 days, not 4 times 4 days. before it is predicted that a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke will explode in Manhattan. The venue is named Racket. That's a typo as well. It's not racket as in a sports racket. The Stones and Lady Gaga made a racket at Racket, and so will the explosion. That's the point, the prophetic symbolism. It is predicted that there will be nefarious activity behind the explosion involving U.S. intelligence agencies, which is what Racket hints at also. Okay, and so that's predicted to be, by the way, on December 2nd, 44 days after the launch party at Racket. And here is some, and by the way, the name of the album, just come to think of it, is Hackney Diamonds, but it was inspired by broken glass on streets in, I guess, Hackney, UK. And so after a rowdy night or something like to that effect, whatever, right? But anyway, so that's also, I guess you could say, symbolism for an explosion and debris and, destruction. Okay, and here is something very interesting. As was explained, it is symbolically very important that Harris visited the nation made up of 4 countries, the UK. Her tweet and video about this visit to 4 countries for a summit was 3 sets of 7, as in British invasion, Joshua symbolism, right? Days after her visit to the Four Corners region of America for a talk on the day that the Middle East 4-party summit talk was canceled. It is predicted that the racket, that's all, by the way, explained more in the Gaza explosion video. It is predicted that the racket invasion of walls of security in Manhattan on December 2nd will be 4 days after Harris's predicted crash in a plane on November 28th. The Rolling Stones are known for having produced a number of songs that were inspired by the Vietnam War. The Stones' drummer, Charlie Watts, died on the day of Harris's visit to Vietnam on August 24, 2021. Her visit was delayed a few hours in Singapore, which is the name, by the way, that means Lion City, due to a report of someone in Hanoi having been targeted with the Havana Syndrome weapon. This hints at the targeting of Harris's plane by God and her crash in the area code 314, which hints at Isaiah 31:4, which speaks of a lion. Hence her delay in Lion City. Her Vietnam visit on the day of the Stones drummer, the Stones drummer died, was 8 + 8 + 8 months exactly. Okay, Jesus, by the way, is in Bible prophecy said to descend from the tribe of Judah, which is symbolized by the lion, all right? Okay, so, and the name Jesus in Greek, gematria, equals 888. Okay, so let's begin again. Her visit to Vietnam on the day of the Stones drummer's death was 8 + 8 + 8 months exactly, which is also 4 + 4, and then 4 + 4, and then 4 + 4 months, which hints at the 44th president, before the prophetic plane crash in a foreign country that was a result of war. The plane crash of the Russian general of the Wagner Group. The day of the death of the Stones, and by the way, that's extremely prophetic, but that's explained in another video. So when I'm writing this email, I'm talking to people that know what I'm already talking about, which makes it very difficult to explain sometimes. I need to elaborate, but I can't. I can't go into any further the explanation for the Wagner Group and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment and on, right? That fought at Fort Wagner, etc. So the day it's explained in other videos. That's why. The day of the death of the Stones drummer and Harris's plane trip to Vietnam, okay, Stones made songs inspired by the Vietnam War, is exactly 110 plus 1 + 7 weeks before it is predicted, in other words, 118 weeks, before it is predicted that Harris will die in a plane crash. The reason why God uses 118 in this way is to hint at this, the 1117th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, which is the word Bama, which in Hebrew means high place. Okay, and so let me backtrack again. The day of the death of the Stones drummer and Harris's plane trip to Vietnam, okay, is exactly 110 plus 1 plus 7 weeks. All right, and 110 is the book of Joshua symbolism. All right, anyway, Harris will fall from a high place, flight 11, 17 minutes, 9:11. Okay, so I'm talking in code now to people that know what I'm talking about, okay? So what I mean here is one reason why God uses the number 1117 is the word Bama, and that also hints at 9/11, because on 9/11 it was flight 11 that struck the North Tower, and then 17 minutes later, the world recognized that it wasn't an accident, but instead was terrorism when the second plane hit 17 minutes later. And so that's an 11 and 17 in a high place. And that's more reason for, anyway, what I'm talking about. So let's move on. The title of the new album, Hackney Diamonds, is said by Jagger to be a reference to broken glass from a car windshield during a rowdy night out. Hackney is the name of a city in the UK, and so the album's name would be a reference to broken glass in the streets of Hackney. The launch party for Hackney Diamonds was in Manhattan 44 days before it is predicted that there will be broken glass in the streets of Manhattan. On September 6th, 2023, the magazine Rolling Stone reported the Rolling Stones' announcement of their new album. The announcement of the new album was on the anniversary of the release of their last album, A Bigger Bang. It was the 18th anniversary. This 18 years is the headline of the Rolling Stone article. In the media in general, a big part of the story of the Stones' new album is how it is their first since 2005, 18 years earlier. 18 years is 6 plus 6 plus 6 years, which hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist. 18 years is also exactly 6 times 6 times 6 months. Okay, and that also hints at 666. This symbolic Antichrist connection to A Bigger Bang album is solid confirmation that the new album hints at the coming Big Bang explosion in Manhattan. Therefore, the launch of the album at Racket in Manhattan is for the purpose of confirming the 44 days to the explosion in Manhattan. A Bigger Bang may also be a reference to how the coming explosion will be more destructive than 9/11. By the way, also, as I'll explain later, John Lennon, who wrote the new song, was shot in Manhattan, and that'll also, as I'll demonstrate, be pointing to the coming explosion predicted in Manhattan. Actually, the announcement of the new album on the 6 plus 6th plus 6th anniversary of A Bigger Bang is 87 days before the predicted bang in Manhattan. 87 hints at Revelation 8:7. The verse that describes the coming solar storm event that is predicted to be on February 22nd, 2024, which will knock out the nation's power grid. This 87 days is also 2 months and 26 days, which hints at H226, the 226th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, which is the word that means prophetic sign. The bang in Manhattan, predicted to be on December 2nd, is in turn 2 times 11.23% of a year. 11.23% of a year is 41 days. Before the solar event, the predicted solar event on February 22nd. 1123, which is what is hinted at with 11.23% of a year, is the 188th prime number. And as I explained, that's very important. In God's signs, I already explained that. It means whoa, exclamation mark, right? So that's why the 11.23% of the year, in other words, 41 days. Okay, so this hints at 2 times the woe because, again, between the predicted explosion in Manhattan, it is 2 times woe to the predicted explosion on the surface of the sun, which will be a bigger bang than the explosion in Manhattan. The coming explosion on the surface of the sun will be a bigger bang than the coming explosion in Manhattan. All right. Also, 2 times woe explosions. The one in Manhattan and the one on the sun. The Beatles set a new record in terms of time span between their first #1 hit and most current #1 hit at 60 years and 6 months. 666. It hints at 666. They also set a new record for time span in between their last #1 hit and their current #1 hit at 54 years. Their prior record was so that's a typo. The prior record was held by Kate Bush, who has the name of a president, at 44 years, the number of a president. The 44th president is the Antichrist, which is why this sign combines 60 years and 6 months in one record and 44 years in the other record. This may be overanalyzing things, but a part of the well-known hook of Michelle is the bridge that is said to be inspired by a song Lennon was listening to the night before recording. The lyric is, "I love you," with "you" emphasized and drawn out, followed by no vocals for the rest of the bridge. Likewise, in the new song, the chorus ends with "you," that is emphasized and drawn out, followed by an interval with no vocals. This correlation may be confirmation for the connection between the 2 songs in God's Signs. I think it is, but there's more to be said, which I explain more in a second here. The new song was made possible because Yoko Ono is now 90 years old. 90 hints at 9, which is the number that symbolizes God's judgment, as I mentioned earlier. And McCartney got around her control because of this. Yoko Ono is, in simple English gematria, is 110, a pairing of 9 and 110. And that is profound because, again, as I mentioned earlier, God confirms his signs and connections through pairing certain numbers together, and God pairs 9 and 110 together frequently. And I've explained it many other times in other videos why, but it is 9/11 symbolism, okay? The new song reached #1 on the date November 10th, which hints at 110, okay? 1110 is 6 plus 6 plus 6 days before Harris's predicted crash on November 28th. Yoko Ono in English gematria is 660. 66th is the 11th triangular number, and therefore this confirms 6 plus 6 plus 6 days from November 10th. It is said that Yoko Ono was a curse on the Beatles, and therefore Antichrist symbolism. All right. And for that matter, she was nicknamed in the media the Dragon Lady. Okay, so she definitely has this Antichrist symbolism about her, being a curse on the Beatles, right? Everyone knows that, right? And her name, and God uses names, especially peculiar ones like Yoko Ono, to give us a gematria value number. And so there you have it, okay? And anyway, she's 90 years old. The song, which she had a big part in, which I didn't even get into here, she handed over the tape. She found the tape, the demo that John Lennon had made. And so she's a part of the new song story, all right? It isn't surprising that Yoko Ono would be a prophetic sign because she is a big part of the story of the Beatles. So somehow you would figure God would incorporate her as part of this prophetic sign. All right, I believe the bigger picture here is now known. Okay, so now we're getting into the really profound stuff here. Hopefully you've made it this far. Hopefully you follow that with all of the other videos too, because this is how it works. You never know when in the video, you can't turn off a video because it's just constantly new information, and you never know when the big profound thing is coming. And so anyway, when the prediction comes to pass, I think you should know that you need to watch every minute of every video is also the point. Hopefully you've made it this far, because now we're going to get into the really a profound thing here. Okay, I believe the bigger picture here is now known. What God is communicating here is starting to come to light. Okay, this is many days after the song was released. Got it now, as in I get it now, okay? This last Beatles song points to the prediction dates. However, what is bigger than this is that the Beatles are symbolic of a generation. They symbolize the baby boomer generation, as I explained earlier. The last Beatles song is symbolism for the passing away of a generation. Even the song's title, Now and Then, hints at the passage of time. And the song's title is a coincidence designed by God. Okay? Not only that, but the composition of the song is a type of time travel, because the original demo was made in 1978, but then George Harrison contributed to it when the remaining Beatles got together in 1995, but this song wasn't completed, it couldn't have been completed until 2023 because of the technical difficulties. And so you have in this song that has a title that hints at the passage of time, produced by the band that symbolizes the baby boomer generation and symbolizes the end of the baby boomer generation, because this is the last Beatles song. And they are, well, Paul McCartney is 81 years old now. So you get what I'm trying to say here? Now, the song is melancholic, which is also symbolic, because it is in contrast with how the Beatles are the quintessential optimistic mood band. I mean, actually, this is another interesting thing. I've looked at this theory called socionomics. And anyway, if you plot the Beatles' #1 albums on a Dow Jones chart over the decades, over the times when they were released, it coincides with stock market peaks. And that's just a reflection of optimistic mood. Well, anyway, let's move on. So the video shows them throughout the years. So the video is also this video is a big part of the prophetic sign. Okay, this video, I think it was produced by Peter Jackson as well. And I say as well because he was responsible for the technology that it provided the ability to isolate Lennon's voice in the demo, which enabled this song to be produced. Okay, so but the video, it's a time capsule, it's a time travel video as well, because you've got younger Beatles mixed in with older Beatles, and it's just, quite the video. It's quite the video production. But it's an allusion to the passage of time, is my point. Okay? So the song incorporates their voices from different songs from the past. Not only that, so they've got in the song, when they're singing together, there's samples, clips, snippets from other songs in the past when they're singing the harmony together on a note. And so they've chopped it from another song, and it could be throughout their career. And it's not like, so they've got, like, from what I recall, there's 3 different notes, and each note is them in harmony from a different song from a different era. Okay? So there's even that part of this, okay? And the video ends with the young Beatles bowing and disappearing. That's really profound. In fact, Honestly, I choked up when I saw that, because I know, partly because I know what's going on here in the prophetic significance of all of this. But it's moving, because if you've watched the video, you'll recall the very last scene is the very young Beatles, black and white, and they're bowing to the crowd after playing a song, and then they disintegrate, they disappear. All right, and then, as I write here in the email, then the Beatles sign behind them also fades away. So the Beatles fade away, and then the sign behind them that says Beatles, it also fades away. It is a generation passing away sign. And I didn't realize it until I wrote this. But it is a literal sign, because the Beatles is a literal, actual sign. And it's in this generation passing away sign. Matthew 24:34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Unquote. Okay, so Jesus spoke about the generation not passing away after the fig tree puts forth its leaves in the spring. And we know from the Old Testament that the fig tree is symbolic of Israel. And its putting forth its leaves in the spring is symbolic of its rebirth and the beginning of birth pains, as Jesus was saying in context here. The beginning of the end times is the rebirth of Israel in the spring. And Israel was literally reborn in the spring, in May in 1948. And 1948 was the beginning of the baby boomer generation. The Beatles were born in 1942. And so Jesus said that the generation that would see this would not pass away before the end. And that's what I said at the beginning of this video. I said, for me, it's a fact. It's an intuitive fact that the baby boomer generation will not pass away until before the Lord returns. And I don't even need the prophecy to know that. And I don't rely on this prophecy to know that, is what I'm saying. Absolutely not. It's amazing confirmation. But I intuitively know that the baby boomer generation is part of the end times, and it must be. You see what I'm saying? Okay? There's reasons why I know that, okay? And I've tried to explain that a little bit at the beginning of this video. When were the Beatles born? McCartney was born in 1942, right at the very beginning of the baby boomer generation. They were born just before 1948 and the fig tree putting forth its leaves, as in Matthew 24, in the spring. It's now winter, metaphorically and coincidentally, literally. Okay? What I mean by that is the baby boomer in social history, there's a cyclical theory of social history that says that generations shape history. Generation archetypes, there's 4 of them, and they repeat every 80 to 100 years. And these generational personas shape history, and in turn, history shapes the generations. And that's what produces a cycle. That's how cycles work. Okay? So anyway, the baby boomer generation, which this archetype happens every 80 to 100 years after the winter season, is born in the spring. And then they come to age as young adults in the summer and engender the cultural revolution in the summer. And when we think about it, the 60s and 70s, when we think of it, it's brightly colored, right? And the 40s and 50s we imagine as being black and white. Well, coincidentally, that was the case because of photography technology, but that was also designed by God. And so anyway, if you think about the fashion, though, in the 60s and 70s, you've got bell bottoms and brightly colored clothing and flower power, etc., right? Well, anyway, so that's the summer, and we are now in this cycle in the winter season. And it's not only that, this last Beatles song, was released at the beginning of the winter on November 2nd, as we're moving into a literal winter coincidentally. Okay, because it's designed by God. This coincidence of the Beatles song being released as we move into winter, literally and metaphorically. The Beatles are passing away as we transition into the winter season of crisis, metaphorically and also literally, November, as I just explained. Actually, I don't think I was overanalyzing. In the Now and Then song, the lyric is, I will love you, with a long drawn out you. Likewise, in Michelle. And Michelle also repeats, I love you in the chorus. It is speculated that John had Paul in mind when he composed the song. I think this is likely true. Actually, I don't think that anymore. I know it's true now. I wrote this originally 7 days ago. As you'll see, it's a fact for me. All right, and I think prophetically it's a fact. Okay, so anyway, but the larger culture at large is speculating that John had Paul McCartney in mind when he composed the song. Okay, either way, I'm sure Paul sees it as a love song between him and John, because it is. This makes this song communication across time between the two Beatles, which further supports this theme in this sign of passage of time and the passing away of a generation. All right, so moving, actually. I choked up a little bit myself when I started to realize this is actually true. These two, essentially brothers, are singing to each other across time. And so, John wrote this in 1978, many years after they had broken up, and he sings this song that says, it's true, it's all because of you. And so, anyway, that's it. But what I'm saying also prophetically is that it is further confirmation of the prophetic significance of this theme of passage of time. Okay? And therefore, this theme of a passing away of a generation, which implies the end of the age and the return of Lord Jesus Christ and the end times. That's why the end of the Beatles, the last Beatles song, okay? There's much more here. But there's much more here, okay? The last Beatles song was released on November 2nd. John Lennon in simple English gematria is 11 to the power of 2, 121, which is what the date 11-2 hints at. 11 to the power of 2. This last Beatles song was written by John Lennon, and his name in gematria is 11 to the power of 2. John's name highlights the number 11, and his name symbolically aligns with the date 11-2, the release of his and the Beatles song. The reason Harris's plane will crash on November 28th is because it will hint at the Pilgrims' 11-ship flotilla in 1630 and John Winthrop's shining city on a hill speech that was derived from Deuteronomy 28. That's why she will die in a plane crash on the date 11/28. It's because of John Winthrop's 11 ships and his speech derived from Deuteronomy 28. There were 101 passengers on the Mayflower that arrived in the New World, the Pilgrims' promised land. Okay, the Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic to the New World as analogous to the Israelites crossing the Jordan River into the promised land. And there were 101 passengers on the Mayflower that arrived. 101 hints at 11, and 101 is the 26th prime number. Yahweh, the name of God, in Hebrew gematria, is equal to 26. The release of the last Beatles song, Now and Then, was released on the date 11/2, which hints at 11 and the Pilgrims, and 26 days later, which hints at the name of God, will be 1128. The date 1128 hints at the Pilgrims and Winthrop's speech derived from God's words before entering the Promised Land, and this is the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. The last Beatles song, Now and Then, symbolizes the passage of time, not only of a generation, but the time between the founding of the nation and the Pilgrims and the current moment in time on the eve of the end and destruction of the nation. That is the big thing here. Okay, so not only is this passing away of a generation theme symbolized with this Beatles prophetic sign, but the Beatles song is released 26 days before it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on the date 1128, which hints at the beginning of the nation with the 11 ships and the speech derived from Deuteronomy 28, which regards God's promises of blessings and curses for the Israelites in Israel, in the Promised Land, dependent on whether or not they obey God's commandments, which was essentially John Winthrop's speech as well before they disembarked their ships into the Promised Land. Okay, so again, from this sign of the Beatles that's symbolic of the passage of time, this song Now and Then, this release on November 2nd is 26 days to the date 1128, which hints and the predicted crash of Harris, okay, and which is also, by the way, hinted at with George Harrison. But this 26 days is relevant too, and the date 1128 hints at the passage of time between now and back then when the Pilgrims arrived. But the 26 days is also relevant because the 26th prime number is 101, and there were 101 passengers on the Mayflower, and 101 hints at 11, and there were 11 ships in John Winthrop's flotilla 10 years after the Mayflower. And so, my friends, what I'm saying is that this end of the Beatles, this last song, is a sign that's pointing to the end of the period of time and history of America. According to the Bible, God created man in his own image.
And it's this idea that will ultimately begin us on our journey in unraveling the number 11 pattern found within Numbers. So let's begin our second subtopic, Numbers, because it too is an important concept in the Bible, because numbers are found everywhere in the Bible, like the numbers 7, 12, 40. There's even a book of Numbers. Another interesting example is the number of the beast, because that particular example highlights the use of numbers and validating that they are important. However, are these two concepts related between an image and numbers? Well, to draw that connection, let's begin with a metaphor, using an image and a mirror. So let's imagine a mirror with a 1 placed here. It would create a reflection, resulting in the image of a 1. Similarly, if we start on the number line, 11 is the first numerical number along the number line to have repeating digits or reflecting digits, and can be further demonstrated when we place a mirror here in the middle of 11. We could say that 1 reflects 1, whereas 10 or 12 don't, because 1 doesn't reflect 0, nor does 1 reflect 2, and so on, hinting at the fact that the number 11 represents reflection. Another important thing to mention is that not only does reflection create an image, but that the image is symmetrical. And what is fascinating is that the number 11 will act in the same way as a mirror, creating a symmetrical image between all other numbers. This can be amazingly demonstrated by this 10 by 10 chart, representing all 2-digit numbers from 0 to 99 in numerical order. And if you notice, the numbers going down diagonally are numbers that are divisible by 11, starting with 11, 22, 33, 44, and so forth. And if you notice, it acts as our axis of symmetry between the rest of the numbers. For example, let's look at the 3443 branch. As we follow it out, we have 25 and 52, 16 and 61. Lastly, we have 7, which is symmetrical to 70. This particular example is similar to the 4554 branch, and subsequently all other branches follow this exact same relationship, demonstrating that the number 11 is literally a number of reflection, creating a symmetry between the numbers that branch off of it. And lastly, another unique connection to the number 11 can be found between each symmetrical pair when added together, because the sum of any two of these numbers is divisible by 11 as well. So let's go back to our first branch that we used in our first example and see the connection. Because 34 plus 43, 25 plus 52, 16 plus 61, and 7 plus 70 all equal 77. And 77 is divisible by 11, which is also shared between all other symmetrical pairs as well, like 58 and 85. When you add those two together, 143. Divide that by 11, 13. So now that we see that the number 11 represents reflection, like as in symmetry,
the number 11 is symbolic of reflection, and this is why the number 11 in God's prophetic signs is symbolic of the reflection in Deuteronomy chapter 28, in which God described his promises of blessings and curses for the Israelites, depending on whether they obey his commandments or not. The contrast between blessings and the opposite curses is a reflection. These promises of blessings and curses were given to the Israelites before they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Likewise, the pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic to the New World as analogous to the pilgrims' crossing into the Promised Land. This is why John Winthrop delivered his famous Shining City on a Hill sermon as the pilgrims crossed the Atlantic and before they disembarked their ships in the New World. Winthrop's sermon was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. He made it clear to the pilgrims that founded the nation of America that there would either be blessings or curses for them and their descendants, depending on whether they would follow God's commandments. It just so happens that John Winthrop's flotilla consisted of 11 ships, which pointed to this reflection and the contrasting promises in Winthrop's sermon. Similarly, it was 101 pilgrims that arrived at Cape Cod on the Mayflower. 101 hints at the number 11. The journey on the Mayflower took a long, arduous 66 days, and the number 66 is the 11th triangular number. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 11th row is 66. John Winthrop became the first governor of Massachusetts, and he lived on Governor's Island, which in the 20th century was converted into Logan International Airport. It was from Winthrop's Island on 9/11 in 2001 that Flight 11 departed. Flight 11 had a crew of 11 people, and it flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, a name that is made up of 11 letters. And this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance, time is running out, as in last chance for the nation to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction. In Ronald Reagan's famous farewell speech to the nation from the White House Oval Office, he used the phrase and theme of a shining city on a hill, which he deliberately borrowed from John Winthrop in order to reference the spiritual founding of the nation in the righteous Christian God of the Bible. In his address, he also mentioned John Winthrop's name. Reagan's speech was on January 11, 1989. The date January 11th, 1/11, hints at the number 11. Before becoming the president, Ronald Reagan was the governor of the 31st state to join the Union, California. The 11th prime number is 31, and on the 31st anniversary of Reagan's City on a Shining Hill speech, 11 people were killed on the date 1/11 in 2020 due to Winter Storm Isaiah, a hint at the prophet Isaiah in the Bible. On this same day, the MVP in what was at the time the most recent Super Bowl, player 11 for the New England Patriots, was arrested at 9 p.m. in Los Angeles for vandalism. This is because Flight 11 on 9/11 was a flight from New England to Los Angeles. 9 plus 11 days after 11 deaths on the date 1/11 due to Winter Storm Isaiah, President Trump trumpeted the phrase "prophets of doom" in a major speech. The 279th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word meaning unrepentant. This is why Reagan's Shining City on a Hill speech was 279 days before the major prophetic warning of God's judgment that was the 1989 World Series earthquake. This 279 days was also exactly 40 weeks, and when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains in context of earthquake signs. According to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. Santa Cruz is Spanish for Holy Cross, and this is why the epicenter of the 1989 World Series earthquake occurred in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 10 miles from Santa Cruz, California, and caused a section of the Bay Bridge that connects the two cities that were playing in the World Series at the time of the earthquake to collapse, which hinted at the bridge between man and God, which is the cross, having been collapsed. And in the most central prophecy in the Bible, in Daniel chapter 9, the Messiah is put to death on a cross after a period of 69 weeks, which is why the earthquake was a magnitude 6.9 and was in California and was exactly 40 weeks after the City on a Hill speech by the 40th president, who was the governor of California. And the 1989 World Series earthquake hit and caused fires throughout San Francisco, a city known for having been built on hills. It is because the number 11 symbolizes God's promises of blessings and curses for his nation in Deuteronomy chapter 28 that it is predicted that U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on the date 11/28 on her way to or coming back from the 31st state, which will lead to the curse of the Antichrist president. John Lennon in English gematria is 726. The 726th word in Strong's Concordance is the word meaning rapture. Okay, so if you don't know what the rapture is, that's when God's faithful will disappear before the severe persecution from the Antichrist and go and be with Jesus in the kingdom and then return with Jesus. At the end of the video of the Beatles' last song, the Beatles members disappear and vanish, just like those in the rapture will disappear and vanish. And that's why John Lennon's name equals 726. In Bible prophecy, it is said that God's faithful will disappear and vanish. They will be raptured in an escape of severe persecution from the Antichrist and tribulation in the world. This rapture event will be on May 26th, 2024. May 26th, 2024 is 206 days after the release of the last Beatles song, which includes the video of them disappearing. 206 hints at 26 and the name of God. through the name John Lennon and the name of God, God has confirmed the date of Harris's plane crash, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist, and also the date when he will rescue his faithful from the Antichrist, with two numbers that symbolize 26 in God's name. 26 days and 206 days. Right? From the release of the song and the video, it's 26 days to Harris's crash and 206 days to the rapture. And the video hints at the rapture, and so does John Lennon's name. And we get the connection through God's name of the number 26. The vanishing of the Beatles in the video is a rapture sign. These two songs, Michelle and Now and Then, contain the lyric I love you and symbolize the passage of time. Communicate God's love relationship from the beginning and over time with his country, America. The last words John said to Paul before he died were, quote, "Won't you think of me now and then?" Unquote. The cassette for Now and Then was given to Paul, said on it, for Paul. Actually, I've come to learn that Paul didn't get the original, and he didn't even get a copy of the original. I think it's a copy of a copy. And anyway, apparently the original has on it written for Paul. But and from what I understand, it is believed that it's John Lennon's handwriting. I suppose I'm 90% sure that that's the general understanding, although I did hear somewhere that it's possible that it's Yoko Ono's writing when she was going through John's stuff or something and wrote it on it. But that's like bringing in the doubt. But there is no doubt, because we know intuitively what God is communicating here through his signs. We know what God is communicating. It is a love song for Paul. And when you think about it, the lyrics also are clearly a friendship. It's clearly friendship. And anyway, what's the bigger point here, though, is that the last words from John to Paul were, "Won't you think about me every now and then?" All right? And as I'll explain, there's more to this, as I'll explain. So rather than repeat it twice, I'm going to come back to this, okay? So anyway, we have this big prophetic sign, which is this last Beatles song named Now and Then. And it is speculated, although it's not, for me, speculation, that the song was written by John for Paul. All right? So, yeah, these words were on John's mind. And that's why he said these words to Paul and wrote a song named Now and Then. All right? And he says in the song, "It's all because of you." So, anyway, it's such a beautiful thing, actually. The song reached but I'm going to come back to that in a second. Okay, so the song reached number 1 on November 10th. This is a series of ones. This is more confirmation that the symbolism in the date 11-2 hints at the number 11 to the power of 2, and is confirmation that John Lennon's name hints at its gematria that equals 11 to the power of 2. It is confirmation that the purpose of this is for hinting at the number 11, John Winthrop's 11-ship flotilla, and God's promises of blessings and curses. The name John in John Lennon hints at John in John Winthrop, right? That's something that wasn't mentioned earlier. As I was saying, the release of the song connects to the predicted crash of Harris on the date 11/28, which hints at John Winthrop and his speech derived from Deuteronomy 28 and the 11 ships. Well, we also have confirmation from the actual name of John, because it's 11 to the power of 2, and we've confirmed that that's prophetically relevant through the other ways. And furthermore, his name is John. John Lennon hints at John Winthrop. That's amazing. People around John before he died say that John knew he was going to die shortly before he died. He had a premonition. And the last words he said to Paul before he died were, "Won't you think of me now and then?" So that's more confirmation that Paul or John, had this in mind with this song. He knew he was going to die. He had a premonition, and the people around him say that this was clear. Actually, I find it hard to believe that John was randomly writing a love song that was not personal in some way. And knowing what I know now about John's life in his final years, it is highly unlikely that the song was inspired by his relationship with Yoko. So I've come to learn that his relationship with Yoko wasn't very good in the end. Or who knows for how long it wasn't good. I don't know. But it wasn't at the time that he was writing the song. Okay? That's, who am I to say really, right? But that's what I understand. So I find it hard to believe that it would be about Yoko Ono, furthermore. But it's clear for other reasons that it isn't about Yoko Ono anyway. In my opinion, it was most certainly about Paul. You know it's true, it's all because of you, the lyric. Additionally, the last words he spoke to Paul were, "Won't you think of me now and then?" And it is also quite likely that those that say that John had a premonition that he was going to die are telling the truth. Therefore, the song written in 1978, shortly before he died, was a sort of goodbye to Paul. Having thought about it, I highly doubt Yoko wrote on the cassette for Paul. It was written by John. John wrote for Paul on the cassette. On a personal note, there was a night in Madrid in 2017 after spending an exhausting day handing out flyers. By the way, if you'd like the file for the flyer that I hand out, please contact me. And in my opinion, everyone should be doing this, handing out flyers. And in my opinion, it should be my flyers, because the typical evangelical tracts are not appropriate. First of all, they're largely containing errors, theological errors, talking about the love of God when it's never the love of God is never spoken to to unbelievers in the Bible, including in the book of Acts. All right. Second of all, if you are watching this video, you have valuable information. It's a bag of gold. So that's another reason for not handing out typical evangelical tracts. You need to be handing out the flyer that I have, or something very, very similar, right? But the flyer I have is, a lot of time is put into it, a lot of information on it, and that's the key. It's not just one even paragraph. It's tons of information, that people desperately need to know right now. If you are a watchman, which I assume that you are if you're watching this video, you're interested in God's prophetic signs, you need to be warning people as a watchman, right? You need to, as the Bible says, the sons of Issachar knew what to do according to the times. You need to know the times that you're in order to know what to do. All right, so anyway, I really don't know what people are thinking if they are not doing this. Even if they're shy, handing them out anyway, courage isn't a lack of fear, it's action in spite of it. You can hand them out on busy street corners and mailboxes, car windshields and busy parking lots, all right? And you need to be doing something like this all the time, right? I don't understand what people are thinking. It's a bag of gold, and Jesus warned Christians that did nothing with their bag of gold that they would be going to hell. That's clear in Matthew 25, okay? So, all right, so anyway, on a personal note, there was a night in Madrid in 2017 after spending an exhausting day, and you should be exhausting yourself as well. You should be working to the point of exhaustion every day. If you're watching this video, it's probable that you're spending too much, you're a video watcher, the irony here, and that you're spending too much time watching videos. You can't take the knowledge with you to heaven. You need to be using it. And you need to be getting out there every day in your spare time and exhausting yourself, working yourself to the bone. That's what it means to be a follower of Christ. Your sole purpose for being alive right now is to help others, right? After spending an exhausting day handing out flyers, I had to go to a jazz club and collect the keys to the Airbnb room from a musician playing on stage. The Airbnb place was a sort of artist's studio. I slept on some sort of inflatable mattress that seemed to be in a musician's room. But sitting alone in what would be considered a common living room of the warehouse apartment, I found myself staring at a poster of John Lennon or the Beatles and contemplating the life of John. My thoughts were how John was now dead and that his fame and fortune did not matter in the end. He had a great life, so I assumed at the time, but he lost out on the opportunity to serve God. Even though my night with accommodations had been a serious struggle, I felt blessed with that opportunity, and I was contemplating something to the effect that there is no reason to be envious of John in any way. I felt the glow of the Holy Spirit. This was just thinking to myself. It wasn't really about John. The Beatles song was produced using AI. Harris was in the UK for an AI summit on the same day the song was released. It reached number one after 60 years and 6 months since their first number one hit. Their last number one song was 54 years ago, which broke the prior record of 44 years. It reached number one on November 10th, 2023. 7 days later, Samuel Harris Altman was fired as CEO of OpenAI on November 17th. In turn, which hints at that 1,117 that I mentioned earlier, by the way. In turn, 11/17 is 11 days to the predicted date of Harris's crash in St. Louis. This 7 days and then 11 days hints at Genesis 7:11, and also the eclipse that peaked over St. Louis at 1:17 p.m. The Beatles founded the Apple Music Company. Their first and last hits are 60 years and 6 months apart. The Apple computer was sold, the first one, was sold for $666.66. An apple is the symbol for the forbidden fruit and the serpent in the Garden of Eden that tempted Eve. The Antichrist's number is 666. The mark of the Antichrist will be enforced through Apple computer products and AI. Digital currency will be used to enforce the mark of the Antichrist, and this is why their last hit was 54 years ago. The number 54 hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment and programmable digital currency, because of the story of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which was about the $13 that they weren't paid, that the other white northern soldiers were paid, an example of oppressive minority laws. And it hints at, of course, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. The first black regiment was the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And anyway, this money aspect of this 54th Massachusetts Regiment story is symbolism for the oppressive minority laws that will enforce the mark of the Antichrist through programmable digital currency and the rationing of food, which, by the way, also Apple hints at. The apple is a food. This 54 years record broke the prior 44-year record because the 44th president is the Antichrist. The eclipse peaked for 4 times 40 seconds. There are 44 days remaining in the year after November 17th, the day that the CEO of OpenAI was fired. And on November 17th, it was announced that 44,000 hours of 6th day of the first month footage is to be released. Okay? That's another prophetic sign. But anyway, again, the date 11/17 hints at Obama, and the Antichrist described in Leviticus 11:17. Okay? Okay, the Beatles' famous last ever concert was in Candlestick Park in San Francisco. The Lord has used Candlestick Park in other signs, including the 1989 World Series earthquake and the power outage during a Monday night football game that was on Hanukkah Day 1, which made the name Candlestick hint at the menorah candles in the temple. The last ever concert that ended that particular concert tour began at 9:27 p.m. The Lord uses the time 9:27 in his signs to hint at the end of time and the passage in Daniel 9:27, the end of the age. It's the last verse. This is the most central prophecy in the Bible, and the last verse of it is about the end times. 9:27, Daniel 9:27, which is the verse about the end times, which confirms the significance of the last ever Beatles concert, the end of Beatles touring. A famous documentary made by Ron Howard about the Beatles' touring years is titled 8 Days a Week, which hints at the 8 days of the festival of Hanukkah. Okay, hence the connection to Candlestick Park. The last ever concert on August 29th, 1966 was 6 plus 6 plus 6 days after John Lennon's infamous press conference in Chicago, the home city of Barack Obama, on August 11th, 1966. And 6 plus 6 plus 6 days hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist. Lennon apologized and clarified his remarks from earlier in the year, which had recently become major news. Quote, "Christianity will go," said the unguarded Lennon in February. "It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and will be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me." In his apology on August 11th, 1966, Lennon said, "I'm not anti-God, anti-Christ, or anti-religion." John said, "I was not saying we were greater or better. I wasn't saying whatever they're saying I was saying. I'm sorry I said it, really. I never really meant it to be a lousy, anti-religious thing. From what I've read or observed, Christianity just seems to be shrinking, to be losing contact." 6 plus 6 plus days after his apology and his use of the word Antichrist was the last ever concert that began at 9:27 p.m., which hints at the verse in Daniel about the Antichrist. To confirm his signs, God pairs 9 and 44. From the last ever concert, it is 4,440 hours, the equivalent of 185 days, to the 9th Grammy Awards, in which the song Michelle won Song of the Year for the year 1966. And again, that was exactly 680 months to the release of the last Beatles song, which reached number 1 60 years and 6 months after their first number 1 song. All right, so you got that here? One of the big stories about the Beatles was this moment and this controversy after Lennon said that that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, right? To sum it up. And he apologized for that 6 plus 6 plus 6 days before the last concert. And he mentioned the word Antichrist in his apology. And the number of the Antichrist is 666. And then from the apology, it is 4,440 hours, which hints at the 44th president, to the 9th Grammys. And God pairs 9 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections. And the 44th president will become the president again through Michelle, and Michelle won the Song of the Year at the Grammys. And as I explained earlier, that connects with the number 68, which is a hint at the word stone to the release of the Beatles song in conjunction with the release of the Stones, the Rolling Stones album, as I explained earlier. So this is all amazing here. And so here we have it. The Beatles represent the baby boomer generation, but the baby boomer generation and their cultural revolution represents the radical departure from God. And the Beatles also represent this cultural revolution as, in a way, they led the way. It's not even as in a way. They did lead the way, literally. The Beatles led the way in the cultural revolution. You know, and God designed it, by the way, for them to break up at the appropriate time when they no longer needed to be leading the way of the cultural revolution. You go into the 1970s and the cultural revolution is well underway by that point. And so the purpose of the connection to the song Michelle in 1966 is to point to the words of John Lennon in 1966. That's the bigger picture here, okay? Yes, okay, we got this fine connection to the song Michelle, hinting at Michelle. Of course, she will enable Barack to become the president again, but there's more to it, right? Now, as I mentioned earlier, you know, Michelle was born, 1 year, 8 months, and 8 days, 188 before the song was released, etc. But there's still more to it. Ultimately, it's also pointing back to this year, 1966, right? That's also, again, why the 60 years and 6 months connection, too, between the first and most recent or last hit, #1 hit. It's all about 1966, but it's pointing to 1966 because of the symbolism in the last concert that was 6 + 6 + 6 days after John apologized for his controversial remarks about Christianity. And that's what it's all pointing to here. Because the Beatles embody this sentiment towards Christianity in the baby boomer generation and the cultural revolution. That's what it's all about here. All right, so this is the bigger purpose of this last Beatles song, Prophetic Sign. It is a passing away of a generation sign, but it isn't just any generation. This is the baby boomer generation, the drivers of American culture for 60 years. It is entirely fitting that the end of the baby boomer generation would coincide with the end of the age, and the return of Lord Jesus Christ. I have read about and been quite interested in the subject of generations and their roles in social history. In my opinion, it is obvious that it is impossible for the Lord to return after the baby boomer generation has passed away. The baby boomer generation is not going to be absent for the end times. This is an intuitive fact for me. Paul McCartney is 81 now. The leading edge of the baby boomer generation is now past the average life expectancy age. The time for the Lord to return and the end of the age is now. All right, so as I wrote here, there's more to the story of Now and Then and the John and Paul connection. It's in the second half of this video. It's clearly supernatural. So there's too much to type out to my friends here, so I'm just going to give it a shot explaining it, okay? So as I mentioned earlier in the video, I said I would come back to this theme of John writing the song for Paul and John's last words, okay, to Paul. By the way, those last words to Paul were in the hallway of the Dakota building in Manhattan. And John was shot in the Dakota building of in the hallway of the Dakota building in Manhattan, okay? But anyway, his last words to Paul were, "Won't you think of me now and then?" And the song, as we know, was titled Now and Then, that John wrote shortly before he died. And clearly it's a song that's about friendship. It's clearly about Paul. And there's even speculation, which I think is true, that the words for Paul on the original copy are actually John's handwriting. All right, but shortly after, from what I understand, from what I recall, maybe like a year after John died, Paul McCartney had gotten together with his childhood idol, Carl Perkins, a famous singer from before the time of the Beatles. And Carl, I guess it would have been the 50s. I think Carl Perkins would have been a rock and roll artist in the 1950s. But Carl Perkins, in the presence, I think in Paul McCartney's home, from what I recall, sang a song that he wrote for Paul. And the song ends. How does the song end? The song ends with the words "now and then." But I'm not sure if it says, "Won't you think of me now and then?" But I think it is. I think it does say something to that effect. But the final words of the song are "now and then," and it's about thinking of their Carl Perkins and Paul McCartney's friendship. And apparently, McCartney broke into tears because Carl Perkins sang the song for him. He hadn't heard it before. Paul hadn't heard the song before. He sang it for him in his home, and Paul McCartney broke into tears and had to step outside. And then Linda McCartney explained to Carl Perkins what had happened, because those were the last words, and Carl didn't know that. Those were the last words of John to Paul. And that can't be a coincidence. But not only that, we have in a video, and you can see it in the video that I've linked to in this email, but there's a moment where Carl Perkins is in his home studio telling the film crew about the story, about the song that he sang for Paul and the sentimental meaning it had for Paul and everything. And right at that moment, on the intercom, his wife or someone buzzes Carl Perkins and tells him that Paul McCartney had just called. And the film crew and Carl Perkins is shocked, and the film crew are like laughing, but it's like a shock kind of laugh. Like, like, we can't believe what's just happened here. Because he was just talking about Paul. And then Paul called him. And it's not like they call every day, because Carl Perkins asked his wife or whoever, "Did you get his number?" Because, Paul just, the message was Paul just called. Well, did you get his number? So anyway, it's not like they're calling every day, every hour or something. And then Carl Perkins said to the film crew right after that, "So if you don't think that this man has some kind of connection to the spirit world," so that was Carl Perkins' words. And so there you have it. There's more confirmation of the supernatural confirmation from God that this song is there's something supernatural here. These were the last words of John to Paul. The song's named "Now and Then." "Won't you think of me now and then?" And they were given in the hallway where John was shot. And now you have the story of the Carl Perkins connection as well here. What can we say? This is clearly a song about the passage of time, and God has done some amazing things here regarding this. Lennon said his last words to Paul, "Won't you think of me every now and then?" in the hallway of the Dakota Building. Lennon was shot in the hallway of the Dakota Building. The first recording of the Beatles was on August 22nd, 1962, when Granada Television documented the up-and-coming Liverpool band. That was the first time they were ever recorded. All right? August 22nd, 1962. The last time the Beatles met together to record was August 20th, that's a typo, 1969. 2 days later was their final photo shoot at Lennon and Ono's home, the photo shoot for that album. The final song they recorded on August 20th, 1969, is titled The End. It's the final song on the Abbey Road album. In Daniel chapter 9, the end of the age is a symbolic 7 years. From the beginning of the Beatles first being recorded to the end with the song titled The End, it is exactly 7 years. In the song, McCartney plays tribute to George Harrison by playing a slide guitar. Harrison's biggest song was My Sweet Lord. Okay, the new song, the song Now and Then, used AI, artificial intelligence, in its production, and it was released on the same day that Kamala Harris, which is hinted at with George Harrison and the slide guitar, was in the UK, the home of the Beatles, to speak about AI. That's astounding. All right, again, the song used AI in its production, and a part of the song points to George Harrison because of McCartney's playing the slide guitar. And the Beatles are from the UK. I mean, they were called the British Invasion. Oh, you know what? That's probably part of this too, because the Beatles are known for this British invasion, which was in the 1960s, and this large number of British musicians that became the biggest hits, right? And the Beatles were the biggest of the British invasion, as they call it. But this would be symbolism for the invasion, which is currently symbolically happening with the southern border. That's also symbolic of what's coming, but it also is an allusion to Revelation chapter 12 when Satan and his angels are thrown down from heaven to earth. That's an invasion of the demons, right? And ultimately, we are talking about eventually here next year a mass demonic possession and genocide. But anyway, so invasion. Okay, so that's amazing. Harris was in the UK on the same day speaking about AI, on the same day that the song that used AI that was released, made by the Beatles, who are from the UK. Okay. 11/2, the date, hints at two planes that crashed into the two towers that looked like a giant 11, beginning with Flight 11 with a crew of 11, by the way. That's what the date 11/2 hints at. 11/2 in 2023 was exactly 36 months, and God uses 36 months for a few reasons, but one is that in the Bible, King Ahab was given, or rather, God relented from destroying the kingdom of Israel after King Ahab repented, and God relented for 3 years. That destruction that would have happened had King Ahab not repented. Well, anyway, Bill Clinton repented exactly 3 years to the very minute on live television with a pastor before the last building collapsed on 9/11. Anyway, 36 also, because 36 months is 3 years, and also 36 hints at or symbolizes 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, because 36 is 6 times 6, but also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 36 equals 666. And so this 11/2 date on which the song was released, and the date that hints at 9/11, was released exactly 36 months after the death of the clock tower lady from Back to the Future, whose last acting role was playing Mrs. Harrison, as in Kamala Harris, in a TV show. The clock tower lady's death was exactly 999 weeks after the towers on 9/11. All right, the most important number in God's signs is the number 9, is from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived, And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.